Good evening, everyone. My name is Clay Newton. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. I'll get us started off here tonight. We have an order or an approval of the agenda or a motion for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay. Seconds out there. Any further discussion? Okay, so will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Orloff,
Yes.
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Yes.
Yes.
That was a
Okay.
Did you hear me, Tessa?
Now I can, thanks.
Did you call? Yes. Okay, at this point, we'll take public comment. You're certainly welcome to comment on any of the items that are before the Planning Commission here tonight, or if you have something else that you believe is within our purview, now is your opportunity. We ask that you limit that comment to 3 minutes. And again, please do keep it in the purview of what this body can actually do something about. Is there anyone who'd like to make a public comment at this? Online, Robert? Okay, we'll move on. Tessa, I probably should have said this before we covered the agenda. I don't see anything in here about approving the minutes from our last meeting.
They are not ready.
Okay,
Holiday season is pretty rough.
good by me. Yeah. Okay, then we'll move to our action items. The first is a quasi judicial hearing. Okay, so this is a continuation, so I'm not going to go through what a quasi judicial hearing means. If anybody is confused by that, or any point in this process, you're not clear about what's going on, take a pause and explain what your options are. Continuation of CU 2404, William Rasmussen on behalf of Maxine Siegel, applying for a conditional use permit. Continuation of CU 2404, William Rasmussen of Miller Nash on behalf of Maxine Siegel, application for conditional use permit for the placement of a new shoreline stabilization structure. The property is located at 3915 Ocean Avenue, tax lot 400, map 41006 BC, in a residential moderate density R1 zone. The application will be reviewed against the criteria of CBMC 17100 Oceanfront Management Overlay Zone and 17.86 conditional uses. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or personal bias? Has any commission member had any ex parte contacts or made a site visit? Any updates to our staff report?
No, a supplemental staff report was not prepared for this, because no additional information was received until within the last 48 hours.
We have quite a thick packet of additional correspondence that's been given to us all. Is there anything besides what you've given to us?
No, that is up to date.
And Eric, I think you or Jay had a question about the cutoff. There was a cutoff today, like at 1 or 2, the last email that came in.
Yeah, my question, Steve did answer. This packet did include everything that was emailed to
Okay.
us.
All right, have it all. All right. So we'll move to public testimony. The pertinent criteria to be considered are noted in the staff reports and listed on the criteria sheets on the meeting page of the city's website. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal code which the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. The persons who testify shall first receive permission from the chair, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. May we have a presentation by the applicant?
Second, while I try to get our slides up. Right. Thank you, Chair Newton. For the record, Will Rasmussen from Miller Nash.
on behalf of the applicant, the Seagulls. My address is 1140 Southwest Washington Street in Portland. Zip is 97205. With me today is Mimi Siegel, one of the owners, and Adam Reese, the engineering geologist for the project. We're going to basically present in two sections. First, Mimi's going to give a brief statement on behalf of the owner. And then Adam and I are going to try our best to answer some of the specific questions that the planning commission was asking about when we were here last month. The new materials we submitted in the record, there's basically three chunks of information. One is a supplemental letter from Adam walking through an alternative analysis in response to some of the questions that were asked regarding whether clay or soil burrito structure has been presented. Alternatives could work on the site. Second, there's a shorter letter from Troy Hull, who is a geotechnical engineer with over 33 years, kind of the most senior geotechnical engineer at Earth Engineers, looking over Adam's work and essentially concurring with his analysis why the other alternative structures would not function at this site. And then I did our last submittal from today, and I apologize that that one came in so late, is a particular assessment of one of the alternatives proposed up on Pacific Street, which we'll talk about in example 3 today. I apologize for that being so late. We just got a batch of information from OPRD this morning with the kind of original application materials of what that site looked like before it was built. That had a whole bunch of information, frankly, on why that site is different than the subject site. So with that, if the commission doesn't have any immediate questions, we'll dive right into it.
Any immediate questions?
Thanks. Mimi, would you like to say
Hi.
a brief word?
Maxine Siegel here with my husband Marty. And our address is 9515 Southeast 15th Street in Bellevue, Washington, 98004. Marty said to me as we were thinking about the meeting, please show them that we're a family, that we're not just the subject property. So I've spared you the carousel, 40 years of family photos that he would have liked me to bring. But that's the reason for those photos, and I thank you. Also, we're here before yet another major holiday, and I want to thank you for the time and attention that you've spent. I heard you say this is a really thick packet, and we appreciate the intense regard that you're giving the subject and the specifics of our case. We took your questions and we took your suggestions and your observations very seriously and confirmed our resources. And thanks to Adam and Will for presenting for us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mimi. I would not be surprised at all if folks would have found your slides of family photos more entertaining, at least, than hearing me talk about shoreline stabilization measures. Generally today, Adam and I are going to talk about a number of things, but they all fall into two kind of broad categories. One, trying to answer the chair's question of what constitutes a failing shoreline stabilization measure and whether the examples that have been presented from members of the public in this matter are failing or are not failing. And then second, talking through those sites specifically and explaining and trying to show in detail why they're not working to serve their purpose. For the initial question, what constitutes a failing shoreline stabilization measure? From a legal standpoint, there's two primary ways to try to answer that question in this context of interpreting a city code. One is looking at the text and context of the code, what the purpose is, what's the function of that structure. And the second is to ask an expert on what a functioning shoreline stabilization is like and what are indications that it's failing and why. In our circumstance, come down from anything. The section of the code that talks about these structures, what was chapter 17.42, describes this hazard consistently, and it's about 8 times in that section of the code. As wave overtopping or ocean undercutting or inner dune areas that are subject to ocean flooding. So I would say a measure that allows wave overtopping or ocean undercutting or ocean flooding in a way that jeopardizes property is a failure. You heard a good chunk of information from Adam at our last month's presentation about the industry standards for shoreline stabilization and what constitutes one that's working or not working at a subject site. That's a number of things, but the big picture from kind of my interpretation of what Adam said is that it's a defensible slope angle. So not an oversteepened slope that indicates an undercut site, ocean kind of tearing away the toe until it's vertical, near vertical, even undercut as exists at the Seagull site, with a toe specifically designed to handle the site-specific wave energy. So not all sites have the same amount of waves coming up and smashing on them. Some are set back further from the ocean. Some have haystack rock in front of them. Some are in estuary. But that toe is one of the most important parts because that's what keeps the slope angle where it needs to be to maintain the bluff. And that's where it frankly incurs the most effect from the ocean. Those things that Adam's talked about there, that kind of slope angle and the toe stability, are largely what controls the things talked about in the code, whether there's wave overtopping, ocean undercutting, or ocean flooding going on. So next, we're just going to kind of talk through the specific examples that have been discussed and show photos that are already in the record and photos from today for some of these sites. This first example is 3188 Pacific Avenue. This is about a half a mile north of the Seagull home. Construction in 2021. So we kind of consider this the most analogous, most current design that we have out there for soil or clay burrito structure. Picture up here is from 2023. This was essentially two storm cycles or two storm seasons after it was installed in 2021. And Adam, is this what a functioning shoreline stabilization measure looks like?
Yeah, Adam Reese, Earth Engineers, 2411 Southeast 8th Avenue, Camas, Washington, 98607. Got to write that down so I get used to it.
Thank you for not us having that.
To make sure I'm straight. Yeah, so the way that the structure was designed, at that point, the structure can be considered to have failed. Those aren't overlapping anymore. They've washed out the matrix, within that. It's failed substantially. It's substantially worse now, but at that point, it would have had to have been rebuilt to function as it was originally designed.
So you talk about kind of the slope being steepened in your supplemental materials. Why does this slope steepness matter?
So originally this was designed as some steepness of every, in the design and the permit, it said it was 1-to-1, one horizontal to one vertical, so 100% slope. At the point where it's eroded back to this, and there's two components, and in one of the documents we provided, I elaborated a little bit more just to explain. We're not designing one of these, but to give a little bit more of an explanation of what the design of one of these is, because that's not, but it matters in terms of this discussion. And so you have these overlapping layers of the soil burrito structure, the clay burrito structure in this case, that make up the structure, which is what's holding back the slope. So when you design that, that's the portion of it that you need to stay intact and functioning at that slope angle permanently, basically. Then there's a portion, so that's component one of two of, your soil burrito structure. The second one, which is what you see when you walk by one of these after it's constructed and what you'll see in additional photos, is, when this was built, they put a 16-inch layer of sand, or, it could be any planting media. In this case, it was sand over top of it, and then it's vegetated. And so when people are referring to maintenance, for instance, when you guys had a presentation that by OPRD that told you, they weren't maintaining the structure, what maintenance of this would have been is, putting the planting media, that sand layer back on top of that again, if that had eroded away in some reasonable period of time, and then replanting it. But by the time it's eroded back and chewed into all this stuff, it has to essentially, because those layers are stacked one on top of each other, in order to do the bottom one, you have to remove all the ones on top of it. And so that needs to be rebuilt at this point.
May we ask questions as you're going along, or would you like us to hold our questions until after you're finished?
You can ask you, I mean, we're only here to try to benefit the commission. So please, if you got a question, please toss it out when you got it.
Great. Do you have a question?
I did have a couple of questions. So this was originally designed with a 1-to-1 slope. It actually was steeper than you would recommend any shoreline stabilization be. So this may have started out poorly designed.
Yeah, and I described that in that report. I don't think they constructed it at 1-to-1. To be honest with you, I think they constructed, and look at the original photos and everything like that. The photos in the DLCD document and everything. You look at that photo up there where they've reconstructed it.
That's it repaired on the left, and it looks closer to 1.5 to 1.
1.5 to 1, or even 2 to 1, maybe. So, which makes sense in terms of. Go ahead. I'll let you.
Actually, I think what I'm wondering is maybe it wasn't designed well, but is there a possibility that this could be better designed and last longer? I think my other question would be, you talked about failure of maintenance, but it sounds like what you just said was that it was because the overlying soil and vegetation was allowed to be worn away before they maintained, that if they maintained sooner, maybe this geotextile wouldn't have torn, et cetera.
In certain environments. So let's look at the next slide. I think that'll help answer this question, because I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
So, if you had, let's say, 1, 2, 3 seasons, for, your grass in this case, or willows in other cases, or whatever, grass, if you have a potentially rapidly eroding slope, grass might not be the worst option, because it's going to grow and take hold the fastest. Your willows or a shrub like that is going to take longer. It's going to be more effective ultimately. But in a case like this, if it has potential for eroding away very quickly, the fastest thing that's going to grow is a grass. But if you look at these two examples, the left was in information provided by friends.
August of this year on the left,
Oh, sorry.
November of this year on the right. So that's after it was repaired recently on the left, just this past summer. And then on the right, it's after the first king tide hit in November.
So, I don't know if your eyes are better than mine, but you can see kind of a little red flag, survey stake on the right-hand side. It's closer up on the right-hand figure than on the left. But, in a period, and from August, or really whenever the first, substantial tides would have come in and started eroding this, until it's probably October or later October, so realistically within about a month till you see the photo on the right, and we'll show a photo of today, which is even substantially worse. You had substantial erosion that there's no way in these conditions that you would be able to have your plantings on the lower part of the slope take hold in the energy environment that you have here.
So you don't think if you changed the slope or type of material on it, it would have saved this thing?
No.
So there were some materials, I believe, in our packet recently submitted that indicated that actually someone's done a dissertation study, I think, and found that grasses are actually worse and cause more erosion than, say, something like a willow. Have you had any experience with that?
No, I'm not
Just curious.
a gardener, but I think the point being that if you can't get anything to grow on it within a month, then this eroded away in such a short period of time that nothing under any vegetation is going to be there long enough for it to grow.
So here's the same site today.
This is just today.
So this, again, The left was August of this year after the replacement plantings with the sand and the vegetated material. The right is in November of this year. And then this is today. You're not, you said you've told me you're not a biologist. You said today you're not a gardener. Nonetheless, would you be willing to opine on whether any sort of vegetation could have taken hold and saved this thing?
No, I mean, not, it's too high energy of an environment for vegetative stabilization to work.
By high energy of environment, you just mean big waves come in and wash away the sand and
Erosion happens too quickly for that to work.
Washed away the sand a couple of times. Are you aware of whether there was actually sand in those bridges or was it clay?
So the superficial covering appeared to have been sand, and that's what was in the, as designed, in 2020. So a 16-inch layer, on the top, which was sand. And then it was referred to in the permit. There's no as-built or anything like that for any of these things, but it's referred to as clay material from the bank there or nearby.
so you went out there today and took this picture. The top layer of sand and vegetation washed away, that's clearly visible. The burrito bags are still partially there. Are those functioning as they're supposed to be?
No, you can see the geotextile material, what would have at one point when it was designed, you see the one in the front at the bottom, which is completely, collapsed upon itself, then that's just the geogrid material, which would have at one point had a lift of clay material, and so that's gone. That's eroded away, as are, a couple of lifts back.
That assigned to you of the kind of toe eroding and the bank getting over steepened and stuff that leads to undercutting?
Yeah, I know it's completely undercut
Now,
at this point.
you were trying to talk about, I think, this survey marker, which we can see a little bit better here in our last photo. What were you trying to say about this survey marker here?
I'm sorry. So the survey marker, I walked up and stood there and looked at it. It's about the base of that survey marker that you can see and exposed is
Top right corner here.
the bottom of it's at a height of about 5 feet. And so the structure, which appeared to be originally reconstructed at about 1-to-1, possibly less steep than that. So that would imply that the toe of that sandy structure that you saw back in August was about 7.5 feet out from that. So that's the extent of erosion that in just a couple of months at that location of that newly maintained structure there.
Go ahead.
This has been repaired once. Initially put in, it's been repaired on in November.
This year.
The only evidence that I personally have that it's been repaired is that photo that we saw there,
It's going to have to be repaired again.
Well, excuse me, maintenance had been performed there, meaning that they clearly put something over the top of it again, planted it again, and now it's eroded away again.
Is that what it's going to look like again? Is that going to be, what is going to be the procedure for taking it from where it stands today to making it a more efficient?
Do you think there's any way to repair this thing so it actually would work with a burrito system?
Or are they going to keep doing this every 12 months?
That probably between you guys and OPRD and the owner there. I mean, they most likely will.
Would you recommend that?
No. I mean, for all the other reasons that are part of the permit, you're you've got to have construction equipment on the beach, much more often, even just for the maintenance. But now you've got to go back and reconstruct this entire thing. And I mentioned this the last time, and I know that, I don't know this, but, maybe in this process, you guys aren't considering cost as part of this. But a structure like this is going to cost 70% in this example anyway, of what a riprap revetment would cost to construct here. But when this erodes away, like it has, it's gone. So a riprap revetment, for instance, if it needed to be reconstructed, you still have the material there, which is about 75% of the cost, the big angular riprap. So this is a pretty big burden for these individuals, any individual who would have to go through this process to, let's say they have to go through this again because somebody believes that they didn't maintain it properly, and that doing this again and putting another sand blanket on top and planting it again with willows or something might possibly work, but it won't. They will at that point need to pay again, $80,000, I don't know, to rebuild this thing, and then, have it fail, and then the riprap revetment or whatever they're eventually permitted to do because they proved then that they maintained it and failed. But it's
I'd also say they'd get to come through and chat with again and complete the permitting process again. It's not like once you get permitted, you get to keep replacing something forever without completing your permitting process. But it would be quite a.
You keep using the word fail. And I get you're an engineer. You build things and they're supposed to be built a certain way. But there's also the question, what is the overall function? And the function is to make sure that whatever home is behind there remains intact and the foundation isn't undercut. All this failure that we're discussing, to me, looks like an embankment that is basically still in the same place. So the home above is still protected. So yes, we could say that as an engineering fact, structure has failed as it was designed, but it is still operating. So I think we have some differences in definition.
Yeah, just, it's a really good point. So the structure has failed. So from a geotechnical perspective, this structure has failed. The bank has not yet failed. From a slope stability perspective, it was standing at vertical, whenever or near vertical anyway, whenever they built this. That because now that it's eroded away, you can see the bank soil behind this thing. It's the way that these processes work, which I do know, is, now that the structure has been eroded away, the bank behind it is going to be eroded further now that it's over steepened, and then the slope fails. So the slope failure is the next thing that occurs. And then the foundations of the house are at risk and all of that.
The phrase the code uses is undercutting. Is this an undercut? Is this preventing undercutting?
Its ability to prevent undercutting is got the structure itself is completely undercut, and its ability to prevent undercutting of an oversteepened slope is non-existent.
I'm not looking at my phone in the middle of you. I promise. I'm looking at pictures because I walked out there recently as well. And along the lines, I think, of your question, it's interesting to me when I look at a recently approved riprap revetment and the property we're talking about now, I actually don't see where it has gotten into the riprap. All I see is that the toe of the days, I believe this is, has been taken back. So it hasn't actually gotten to the structure itself. Yet when we're looking at the property here, it has. So a couple of things come to mind. One, and this is an assumption on my part, but I think a safe one. Assuming the property line is about the same for both these properties at that location, they are neighbors. Why is this one so much further out into the ocean or into the beach? And why, if we have, I guess it's just this question for me around, we haven't even gotten to the structure on the Days property yet with the two king tide events we've had. It hasn't even touched the structure. So by that, and it's just my own little logic, if if you have a structure that hasn't been touched yet, what if you had a softer structure that also hadn't been touched, but was set back further into the lot? Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, no.
Could you please put whatever photos you're looking at in the record? I have no idea.
Sure, sure. Well, let me,
I mean, I know the day site, but I don't know what you're looking at for photos. I will say each of these properties have site-specific conditions that can vary a couple lots away. You know, we're using this because there's an example put in the record. The Siegel site is clearly undercut from the photos in the record, and we'll show some more today. But how would you answer the chair's question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with the Days site because I was involved with the design and construction of it. And so the reason why that's different is because that has the riprap revetment structure beneath the sand. The sand is all newly placed this year, and it was intended to be a sand blanket, you know, vegetated in the same way. The sand covering that 1-to-1 structure, which the sand cover is more like a 1.5 to 1, so that you can get stuff to grow on it, because get stuff to grow at a 1-to-1. Long story short, there's a lot more sand on top of that revetment that then exists, that's remaining on this. So in one season of that newly constructed revetment at the Days, it's the way that sand works at its angle of repose and everything like that. The sand's being eroded from the base of the slope there, and then the sand from the top is coming down. And in some ways, the newly constructed, the Days will have to redo that, obviously. Well, obviously me, but it's also the sand, you know, consolidating within the riprap and things like that. So there's a lot of different things going on, but as Will said, it's a different property. But that's specifically why that looks like it does right now and why it's different than what this property is.
So we're going to walk through 3 examples today. This example number 1 at 3188, we think is probably the most analogous to the Siegel's location based on the site-specific conditions. And if we installed a soil burrito or clay burrito structure type thing like this at the Siegel's, would you expect it to look something like this within a storm cycle?
Yes.
Okay. And to you, this geotechnical engineering standpoint, you don't think this is functioning?
Yeah, as an engineering geologist, I would say that's correct.
Apologies.
No, that's okay. No, thanks for that.
I try to keep them straight. All right, this is our second example, another site that was identified by some folks as an analogous clay burrito, soil burrito type site that's functioning and serving its purpose. It's a couple houses away from the site we just looked at, also about a half a mile north of the Siegel home. It was installed around 2004. We think it was 2004. I'm not 100% certain. The photo on the left is of it from last month. Now, Adam, you conclude in your report that this is not an analogous site for a couple of reasons. Why not?
Yeah, you can see from the photo on the left that the bank character, you know, there's a tremendous amount of both cobble in there and angular rock. So this bank is effectively armored. I don't know when or why, you know, that became that way, whether it was originally that way or not, but the character of that material is quite erosion resistant, you know, without any planting or anything like that on it. The second photo, I can't see it very well, but if you know, reading back, which the document that I provided explains it, but when it was constructed, they put in 2-foot thick, what they're referring to as clay pillows, but terraces of soil within a geotextile matrix, you know, so again, building up these lifts like a mechanically stabilized earth MSE kind of structure. Constructed about 1.5 to 1. But when you walk up to this and you look like within the willows up there, you see no clay remaining. You see the really plastic material stacked on top of itself in there, on top of the rocky bank material. And so essentially I feel like this site shows two things. One, it's a rocky site that is more reflective of an armored site than it is a vegetated soil burrito site. But two, the armoring that was described, at least in the permit application, as what was going to be put in is no longer there. So in this environment, the clay burrito structures again eroded away. And so you do have willows surviving in a rocky bank there.
You call this stuff angular rock that you can kind of see on this. Is that similar to the type of rock used for revetments?
Yeah,
I know nowadays go with bigger ones.
No, right. That's not what you find as native material on the shoreline here.
Yeah. Thanks. Third example. This was the one that we got a chunk of information from OPRD today on, and we submitted it in the record with an email from Adam and some of the files from OPRD. 1856 to 1860 Pacific Drive. That's actually a typo up there. It's about 1.5 miles north of the Siegel home. It's up kind of right behind Haystack Rock. And from the materials you reviewed today, you kind of said there's a big difference between this subject site. What struck you as different here?
Yeah. So one thing, and that the original documents for the permit application point this kind of thing out. It's terminology used in those documents, but it's essentially behind Haystack Rock. So it's dealing with a different wave energy effect, than most other sites would in Cannon Beach that aren't there behind, that massive sea stack. So I'd say that's probably the most significant difference. The original report documents also, go to point out that geologically different material and character than most of the rest of the beach areas in Cannon Beach. It's not particularly erodible material that makes up the existing bank there. So it had a lot better chance of survival, so if they plant in kind of the same way that 3276, the one we described just a minute ago, they did essentially the same thing. They put, these clay pillows wrapped in geogrid there. And similarly, you can walk out there and you can still see that plastic on the ground. It's primarily, washed out from beneath it. The willows have grown into the more resistant from a geologic perspective, less erodible bank material there.
You also noted the slope and the angular rock.
Yeah, I mean, this is the picture on the left is the before picture. This is from before they constructed, the vegetated clay burritos at this location. So really, it's a question of why do they even need it at that point? You've got a fairly low overall bank angle there. That's 2 to 1 to me. So not really an over steep bank. You got of the soil that's exposed there. There's not a lot of it. It's mostly vegetated as it is. So in everything we said, but in particular because it's overall environment, I don't think that this is comparable to the Siegels property lot of ways of the need of, or, a property for, a different kind of shoreline protect. This is most like a low energy, that the type of shoreline protection, if they needed it at all, would have been, appropriate and has been successful as a result.
So this has a kind of flat slope in my words, this 2-to-1. The Siegel site has a vertical and beyond vertical undercut slope. And are you saying that's something that's caused by the degree of wave energy at a site?
Yeah, their site is being actively eroded.
Here's a picture of the Siegel site. As I was saying, it's a dog in the top left picture. Their bluff is fully undercut. That dog it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but could walk under those bushes that are on an overhang as the ocean's coming in and undercutting. And Adam, that undercutting is caused by the ocean coming in and just basically eroding out the toe. Is that right?
Yes.
It doesn't have that angular rock that you saw in the last two examples. That is the type of rock you see in revetments that helps diffuse wave energy. Also, the bottom right photo just is one of the ocean overtopping. That's just water sitting there that came from a wave that came over the top of that bluff. It came right up next to the Siegel's home.
But if I understand from last hearing, the overtopping won't be changed by whatever revetment is there, because that's just a function of
Yeah.
tide height.
Well, it could be, if the Seagulls went for a really big revetment, it could.
As proposed,
As proposed, it's not designed to stop the existing overtopping. It's designed to keep that from coming further inland by the.
you're worried about erosion, but not overtopping, because overtopping won't be changed by that revetment.
In the long term, it helps with the ocean flooding by keeping the ocean flooding from coming closer to the house by the bluff, by the location of the bluff coming further in. And Adam talks about that some in the initial engineering assessment in the record. But yeah, we would anticipate basically the same amount of overtopping as you see in this thing. It's just not coming closer to them by the bluff coming closer to them. That answers your question. Also, that photo on the top left, just for placeholder sake, is from April of 2023. That was following the recent cobble placement efforts, the first of the recent cobble placement efforts at that location. You can see that cobble all got washed away because of the high energy waves that Adams referenced at this specific location. This is aerial photos from FEMA's hazard mapping function online. The link to this stuff is in our materials. FEMA put this map together several years ago. As the picture on the left, or the aerial photo on the left, kind of shows a close-up of the Siegel home and the nearby homes. You can see there that both the flooding is anticipated at their home because it's very, very low, and that black line with triangles that goes through the edge of their house is the boundary of the moderate wave action zone where 1.5 foot high waves are anticipated. This is one of only a handful of homes in Cannon Beach that's subject to this level of wave energy. And just demonstrates the kind of need for this and why this home is frankly worse off than the ones where we showed photos of the three examples we ran through earlier of the clay burritos that didn't even work at those locations in our assessment. These are some photos taken between the first two examples in the subject site. These photos are actually from the bluff right on the Stephanie Inn. If you're familiar with that location, which I know most of the planning commissioners have visited that not too long ago, the stairwell there is just looking down the stairwell at Stephanie Inn. Those photos were from this November last month. And I'm going to try to play a photo from last month, or play a video, excuse me, from last month on that. So bear with me while I try to do that. Okay, again, this is video taken from that same location, just standing on the Stephanie and Bluff. From last month. Just to get, and this is again, just to give an idea of when Adam says high energy wave environment, kind of what that looks like on a, on a not super intense tidal system. Everybody sees those raw logs kind of bouncing around. We all see them along the coastline here. When those waves come up, those logs basically become battering rams against these bluffs in these locations. I thought about sending somebody to go stand on the Seagulls Bluff, but because it's totally undercut, it would be horribly dangerous to stand there with this going on. So those geotextile fabrics that the soil, the clay goes in, are made of either plastic or biodegradable material, biofabric. That's actually what OPRD believes works best these days. Adam, in your opinion, does that fabric have much of a chance of not getting tore up by waves coming in, throwing logs around like that?
Yeah, the biodegradable stuff would get ripped up, and the plastics, the geotextile material would get torn out intact.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to try to jump back now to my slides. So those waves come along and basically turn what's on the left into what's on the right in 1 month and right there in 2 months. Bags are torn open. As you would expect, a wave coming up like that washes away the surface covering sand, gets into the bag material, tears it up, spills its contents. These were a handful of questions that kind of came up around, questions tangential to this were raised by commissioners at the November hearing. One was whether 3188 Pacific, the first example, would have worked with appropriate maintenance. Pretty sure you answered that already, that in your opinion.
Yeah, for the reasons we mentioned before, I don't believe that it would have.
One question was kind of a time question. How long the Seagulls have before their home is substantially damaged or destroyed?
Because erosion conditions like this are cyclical, and you can have heavy erosion in one season. So you could have 10 feet, 20 feet in a year.
It might go a foot a year or 5 feet a year, and all of a sudden one storm hits the wrong way.
Yes.
Okay. And this was actually Commissioner Morris asked this question again. Does the current proposal help address ocean flooding at the site?
Yeah, the purpose is to essentially stop the bluff erosion, so you have the conditions that you have now, and not any closer.
Not get worse.
Basically. So,
thank you. That is all of my materials. Were there any questions?
Question on the 3276 Pacific. You noted that the pillows are empty, that there's no substrate left in them, but the willow plantings are still there. Does that indicate that it worked as designed? The willows were able to take hold and maintain the bank as is, and then the pillows disappeared as the biodegradable whatever? Or is that's kind of what I was.
yeah, no, it's a good question. And in the best way, or in the way that it would have been designed, no. It would have essentially the structure of the geotextile pillows, clay pillows that they built would have remained as is, and the willows that they planted would have taken within that and kind of protected that, and that actually that berm would have been built out a little farther. This bank is pretty close to their house at this point. However, in the course of time, those willows or plantings, were able to take hold within that material. And I guess that gave it a chance to start. And now it eroded back to what they have. Fortunately, is a rocky bank that most likely isn't going to erode much more.
It looks to me like the willows are on the top part of the bluff, not the bottom. Do you think those willows are doing anything to stabilize this, or is it the angular rock at the base that's kind of dealing with the primary erosion forces?
The rock is what is holding this all, or protecting this property. What they inherently have there, either inherently or what was done supplementally between 2004 and now.
But my understanding is that part of the benefit of the willow is that it does mean that you're less likely when you have an oversteeped bank for that bank to break away and erode because of the root structure. So my understanding of part of the benefit of willows is in fact that they can allow a bank to handle some oversteep. Am I incorrect in that?
I think that's right. What I thought Adam was saying though is that the willows aren't really doing the bulk of stabilization here. It's the angular rock.
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, I think my sense was if we're talking about incursion toward a home, anything that keeps that upper part of the bluff from disappearing is a good thing.
We're all for keeping the top of the bluff and the bottom of the bluff. Yeah.
Exactly. It would be great to keep it all.
Yeah, in particular, because this isn't deliberate armor, I assume, then having those willows there is probably providing a pretty good benefit as well, in addition to them being fortunate and having angular rock within their soil matrix. That's I think maybe historically this whole area is a fill here. There was anyway, I won't go into that, but
There might be historic reasons why the rock at this site isn't at the Seagulls, right? That fair?
that's correct. Everything there is soil. Just to remind, rock cobble, similar to what, not the angular rock, but the cobble that's out there. The Seagulls might have looked something like that. But year 2022, when did you place a bunch of cobbles out there? 2022,
2022 sounds right.
but it washed
Repaired within a year.
away within a year. So
And that's smaller rock than this kind of angular stuff you see.
And then I had another question on 3188, that one there, yeah, you indicated that it was repaired in 2024 of this year, or August of this year. Do you know, was it just covered back up in sand, or did they fill those geotextile bags full of stuff and then covered in sand?
I know the answer to that question. They covered it in sand and vegetation.
Okay, so the existing bags that we're tearing apart that's literally just those bags were covered in sand and then they've just been uncovered again?
Correct.
yeah, the point is, if you had this, if you consider this as the bottom layer and this cover of this is the wrap that, and this layer overlaps that one, in order to replace this one, you'd have to tear off this one to do it. So you really have to take the whole thing apart and start from the bottom to build it up from there.
So Commissioner Orloff's question, like,
So it's unlikely that they rebuilt it, and Robert confirmed that, so.
Robert, do you know if the bags were already damaged at the time that they put sand over the top of it again?
Yes, the bags were in the condition shown in the earlier photo prior to any covering being placed over them.
so
Yes.
this was September of 23. So this was a little over a year ago. But Adam, this is 2 years after installation. Is this a maintenance issue, or is this
Yeah,
structure doesn't work in this high energy environment issue?
That's About maintenance that shouldn't have looked like in 2 years. You know, that's rapid degradation and inappropriate structure for the environment. I think that, you know, the 2024 repair would be an inappropriate term there. The last bullet point, it's maintenance is what they did. They put the sand there. I think the point is that if you call that maintenance, and it's heavier maintenance than would have been done any of the years prior to that, if they had done maintenance, you had that much erosion of the sand that was placed there in just 2 months. I mean, no amount of maintenance that they would have done in a year, in a season, would have been enough maintenance to have prevented the structure from being eroded.
My last comment, if there are no other questions, is that neither I nor Adam Eagles are in love with revetments. If there was something else that would work here, we would have done it. We would do it. Adam and I are working on a project down in Coos County right now that's a alternative measure to a revetment. We're just asking for it because they need it. And the wave energy that exists at this site is too much for clay burritos or soil burritos to maintain. If you think about those logs coming in a real storm, that was just the best storm of November of 2024. You're going to end up with this, and this is not, it's not functioning, and it's not preventing undercutting, which is what your code says we can do. So we respectfully ask for approval of this permit and appreciate the Planning Commission's time and consideration.
Are there any other presentations by your team as part of the applicant?
No, that's it.
Time will call for presentations by proponents. Online, Robert? Okay. If there are no presentations by proponents, are there presentations by opponents? Are you online, Robert? I saw your hand. Okay. Please come forward.
My name is Kai Hazard. I live at 80198 Highway 13. I am the Oregon Field Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. So while I am speaking on behalf of Surfrider and our members both in Cannon Beach and the North Coast, Cannon Beach is also the beach that I always grew up coming to. So I have a personal connection to it. Surfrider did file comments already jointly with Oregon Shores, which go much more in depth, filed this last month. So I'll just keep it brief and respond just to what we heard tonight. We already know that wide riprap it's widely accepted that it's bad for the beach. It hastens erosion in front of the beach and at neighboring properties. It makes the beach impassable at high tide and increasingly at lower tides as time goes on. And loss of our wide walkable beach represents a huge loss to the public. And you can look at that through the lens of wildlife, tourism, recreation, and the reason why people live here. They want to come here for the beach. That's not new information to you all. I think if we want to dissect the clay burrito, we saw a lot of evidence that it maybe was not properly built. It was too steep of a slope, which then steepened more over time. Referencing the one at Pacific, it was not properly maintained to begin with. And then when it was repaired, those repairs were not done properly. It has the improper type of vegetation, being grass rather than willow. When we look at that photo, you can see at the top, there's quite a bit of grass growing. And at the bottom, in the photo from August, there's not a lot of grass growing. So it makes me wonder if it had been repaired earlier and grass had been given more time to grow, would it have fared better tides and winter or in fall storms, as it did that top part of the slope, we could see it was still holding on. It was just the bottom part where there was not really a lot of sand to begin with, or grass to begin with. We know that the clay burritos require maintenance, as do all types of shoreline armoring, including riprap. However, as they are, they're not irreparably damaging the beach as riprap does. I also think it's ironic that it was brought up having equipment on the beach every few years to maintain or repair those clay burritos. I think that a lot of people would take equipment on the beach every few years rather than the entire eventual loss of the beach. I also am wondering why. I know that at the Seagulls property, there was a berm that had cobbles dumped at the toe. And when looking at the clay burrito structure at 3276 Pacific, where they're saying that the angular rocks are what was protecting it more than the willows, it makes me wonder why angular cobble was not placed on the applicant's property rather than the round cobbles that were used. I also want to point out that the video was not just a winter storm, it was king tide, some of the highest of the year. So I think that it's important to take that into account. It's not just any high tide, it's one of the highest. So I would just like to ask the Planning Commission to uphold your city code and deny this application for harmful riprap on our coastline. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Are there other proponents?
Diana Turner. Box 211, Cannon Beach, 97110. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Friends of the Dunes at Cannon Beach. And I want to thank you guys for the continuance, so that you would have a little more time and we'd have a little more time with this. And also thank you for your time, because I know this is a lot to review. So I appreciate that. Now let's see if I can find some slides. So here we are again. Robert, you guys aren't getting my slides. I clicked to join the presenter. Pop down.
You're in charge.
Here we are again. I think we've kind of covered a lot of the same information that we did for last time. I'm sorry that you have to listen to all of this again, but it is so important. So not too long ago, you guys denied the Stephanie and riprap application unanimously. It was upheld by your city council. And for that, we thank you. We think that that decision does have weight as you evaluate this application. I also wanted to mention that the main goal of Goal 18 is to limit hard armoring in order to protect and preserve Oregon's beaches. And Oregon is unique in this. Most states do not have a strong rule in place to limit hard armoring. And one thing that we hear a lot is, well, this particular property, like the Seagulls, is eligible for hard armoring. And I would like you guys to remember that that was just a political necessity to get this Goal 18 passed. It doesn't somehow make the damage that hard armoring causes not as consequential, because for some reason they're eligible. Also, eligibility is just one box. It's the start of the conversation, both here in Cannon Beach and then at an even higher level at the OPRD. So I would like us to focus on all the other things that need to be met in order for you guys to give this your approval. We believe that this applicant has failed to prove, per our city code 1780-230I, that a riprap revetment is the minimum necessary to provide the level of protection required. And for this reason, we're asking you to deny this application. This application began with a desire to install a riprap revetment. And from their report, quote, "The owner is concerned with near-term impacts to the residential structure and wishes to construct a riprap revetment." So while Mr. Rasmussen says that nobody loves riprap, and that may be the case, this process started with, "I want riprap." And they work backwards. How do you justify riprap? And you saw that with all the holes that are in the report that I mentioned in my written testimony. So this is the Seagulls property, picture taken November 24th after the first series of king tide storms. And I see some really well-established European beach grass. This tells us that vegetation can establish here and can be effective here. We also know that their first attempt at erosion control was simply a landscaped bluff of vegetative riprap. And that stayed in place for 15 years. So I assume that they were happy with the level of protection that provided them. This again makes me think that something that is properly engineered with the correct slope and the plantings that are suggested in the guidebook, Hooker willows, along with maybe some beach grass, there's a chance that this could be successful here. Also, you have to remember, I referred to the Stephanie Inn's findings. Quote, "In particular, the council interprets section 2 of this criterion to set a high bar. It is not enough to show that higher priority options may not work or that it's unclear whether they will work. Instead, to install riprap, bulkhead, or seawalls, the burden is on the applicant to show that less invasive options cannot work." So we see this beleaguered example. Kaya with Surf Riders spoke to you guys about the fact that this slope was less than ideal, that it's not planted with what's shown to be the most effective and which OPRD strongly encourages people to plant with. You also know from your presentation from Kevin Herkamp with OPRD, these folks want riprap. At one time, they had a seawall and they asked for riprap and were told that they needed to try a soft structure solution. So this is what they tried. And one has to wonder if this wasn't purposely poorly designed, executed, and maintained in order to get that riprap that they desire. So the other thing is, in the pictures that you see from the guidebook that were taken into the caption just after it was planted or built, you can see that those plants are already dead. They were never nurtured and allowed to take hold and watered. And that is just something that needs to happen. You have a short growing season before the winter storms. So you have to be on top of it. You have to pick your window in April. You need to get the plants in and you need to baby them. And if that doesn't happen, then what can you expect? You know, you're not going to have successful plantings protecting your slope. Also, in the supplementary letter that you received today, Mr. Hull says that while the existing bluff has not yet failed, it is at risk of failure. So while Mr. Rasmussen and Mr. Reese are telling you that this is a failure, Mr. Reese's colleague, Mr. Hull, says it has not yet failed. He also says, well, but it is at risk of failure. Well, sure. Every structure that you put on the ocean shore of the Pacific Ocean is at risk of failure. In fact, expect it to fail. So now we're at 1858 to 60 on Pacific. So these 22-year-old successful burritos with no record of repair or maintenance with OPRD or the city, referenced in the erosion control guidebook as success. So you received a large packet today from Mr. Reese where he starts off by saying, you know, I gave a quick review of this OPRD permit, and he makes a lot of assumptions about, you know, gosh, maybe they never really needed erosion control here. Maybe it's wider, the beach is wider, and that's why it could be. Looking at the pictures, this is not meeting the criteria that's in front of you guys. This is not proving that a higher priority solution would not work here. You have in front of you a burrito that lasted for 22 years. That's a long run. That is a success for any structure on the ocean shore. It's also ridiculous to assume that every example is going to be a complete apples to apples, you know, comparison to the subject property, the Seagulls property. That's unrealistic. And again, the criteria is, have you proven that it absolutely will not work? And they haven't. So then on 3276 Pacific, a 20-year-old successful vegetated burrito. So now they're saying there's no clay in it, and perhaps it was never a clay burrito. Well, the OPRD permit says it is. And just because the clay is gone after 20 years does not mean that it's not a success. It is a success. The guidebook says that clay allows the hooker willows to knit together before it erodes. It did what it was supposed to do, as Commissioner Ostrander mentioned. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was a medium to allow those hooker willows to take hold and secure that bluff. Now we're hearing again that, gosh, you know, I can see some geotech coming through. It's 20 years old. Come on, you know, and the owners have not put in any maintenance on it. So that's a reasonable run for protecting a property with a structure on the Oregon shore. He also mentions that, well, actually, there's a cobble berm out front. And I thought that was interesting because we have been told previously that a cobble berm on a single lot will not be successful. And yet in this case, they're saying, well, gosh, they have this cobble berm, and that's what's really at work here. If they truly believe that, then maybe they need to go back and look at a cobble berm for the Seagulls. So again, in particular, the council represents section 2 of this criterion to set a high bar. It is not enough to show that higher priority options may not work or that it's unclear whether they will work. Instead, to install riprap, bulkhead, or seawalls on the applicant to show that other less invasive options cannot work. Then we see that Earth Engineers recommends a riprap revetment structure will provide the most protective, durable, and cost-effective solution feasible under current regulatory constraints. I completely understand why they made this recommendation. It's what we would all want for a vendor to make for us. Give us the biggest, the best protection. Unfortunately, it's totally at odds with what Cannon Beach needs, which is to protect their beach. So most protective is not a criteria versus with 1780 230I. In fact, our code requires the exact opposite, the minimum necessary to provide the level of protection required. Durable and cost-effective are not applicable criteria. The city isn't tasked with making oceanfront home ownership more cost-effective or require less maintenance. They're tasked with protecting the public's beach. And then we hear from the guidebook, while, and this is in reference to cost, it says, while cost of riprap revetments can vary, both the vegetative stabilization projects constructed on the Oregon coast have been significantly cheaper than most riprap projects. So they were cheaper and they lasted in at least 4 instances over 20 years. I think it's also interesting that we've never heard where these numbers come from as far as cost. And these people have never said that they have built one of these and what it cost and how it performed. So I'm not feeling like this is well supported. The petitioner has not proven that the impact of this more fortified riprap structure will not negatively impact the public's ability to recreate on their beach or will not harm ocean ecosystems as required by 1786-10, Section E1B. So while there's been a lot of focus about all the things that they're, saying are wrong with the successful vegetated burritos, there are other issues at play here that you guys must make a decision about, and this is one of them. So we know that riprap narrows and drowns the beach. And we know that that means that the public will lose their beach. So, you guys need to make that decision that Commissioner Bates mentioned. Are we going to lose the beach anyway? No, we're not. When I asked that question of Rihanna Bezor, Ocean Shores manager at DCLD, she said back, well, tell me how much riprap you're going to put down. It's a cause and effect. You guys are making those decisions that are going to have an effect on whether or not we lose the beach. It's not a static thing. They're building models and having to change them all the time because these decisions are changing. But the state of Oregon is moving away from riprap. There's another riprap application that was denied that Will Rasmussen will know down in Lincoln County that everyone's really surprised about because it's surrounded by riprap like this application. But OPRD said, no, you haven't met the requirement to get this approved. And just last weekend, the state of Oregon pulled out some riprap, made some people pull out their riprap. And Goal 18 they're just starting a review with attorneys and with shoreline specialists, looking at how effective has this been? Where do we need to do better? How do we protect more of our beach? Not less, more. So they've not proven that riprap will not impose long-term and reoccurring costs to the public as required by 178230E. When the beach is drowning due to scouring in front of the riprap revetment, in front of the seagulls and elsewhere, there will definitely be a cost to communities. As we see across the country, they go into doing tons of sand nourishment, they build dunes. The federal government is paying to have some dunes put in. Oftentimes it's homeowners coming together, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in dunes. It scares people when they start losing their beach and they're going to do something about it and it's going to be expensive and we're all going to share the cost because we all want our beach. They've also not proven that riprap will not negatively impact the public's ability to recreate on the beach or harm ocean ecosystems as required by 1786-210, Section E1B. Surfrider and Oregon Shores in their written testimony to you spoke about this as well. We need to think about the wildlife that depends on this ocean shore and that wants to live in a dune and in sand. And we owe them something. And at the last meeting, Commissioner Ostrander pointed out that you can't put over a foot of sand or a foot of sand down on the shoreline. And I wanted to share that the reason that that's in our code is because a former planning commissioner who was very concerned about wildlife learned that if you do that, which is common practice, you're killing the razor clams that live at the shoreline. They cannot get out in time between being buried and a tide coming in. So we're making these small little changes like that one to try to do more to protect our wildlife, but we need to keep it front and center when we're making these decisions. And each application, each lot does matter. So lastly, I'm sure that many of you have seen this video and it means different things to different people. This woman is walking along the shore. Where is she? She is. I haven't seen it stopped. That's funny, it's plays on mine, but not yours. Okay, hold on. Let's try again. So it's not playing for you guys. I
Try
don't,
not running it on the full screen. When you clicked full screen, it stopped.
okay. So there you go. So this woman is walking along the shore and she's grabbed by the tide. She loses her footing. And this is by the Gower Street beach access. She is carried, she's banged into the dune, and here she's banged into the wall, that seawall. She gets her footing, she's holding a log in her right arm. And she's trying to get out. She's trying to get out, and the waves are taking her. And luckily, there's not riprap here. She's able to get her footing and stand up. If she were being drug across riprap and trying to get her footing on riprap, I don't know that she could have. We don't know. So she's been banged against hard armoring, a seawall. But luckily there is sand and she can access it and run away. So when I see two seawalls and a beach access that is also a hard surface, what I see is the power of the waves coming together, funneling, and hitting hard structures. So every time we add hard armoring, we are adding danger. We are adding inaccessibility for people. And I don't think that's what we want. I think if this woman would have been surrounded by, sand the whole time and not bashed into the seawall, she would have done better. And what is this going to be when we have more and more of this? I don't think that's what we want. So for these reasons, I'm asking you to deny this application. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other presentations by opponents? Anybody online, Robert? Okay, we'll back to the applicant for final comment. Your chance to rebut anything you've heard.
Thank you. Will Rasmussen again on behalf of applicant, the Seagulls. Ms. Turner spoke passionately about Goal 18 and our beach and the political balance that necessarily went into Goal 18 and spoke passionately about efforts to try to come up with some different balance there. But I think this commission knows at the end of the day, they have a job to follow the law as it is right now and follow the facts as you heard them today and last month and in the record. And this site is Goal 18 eligible. It's a site that's been developed for decades. There's a home on it, family in it that just wants to protect itself like all of their neighbors have done. Almost all their neighbors have done. It's a vulnerable site. You talk about risk, it's easy to talk about risk when it's not your own home. Basically, if this planning commission were to deny this application, the city were to deny this protection, you're asking the Seagulls to take on additional risk that their neighbors don't have to take. And the wrong storm comes along and they lose their home, and we did that based on our good judgment. There's only one engineering geologist in this room, one set of experts, two individual experts, but one firm of experts that have looked at this from a coastal erosion standpoint with over 50 years of experience, and that's Adam and his colleagues. And this site is at risk. I haven't really heard any argument that this site is not at risk. And balance that's in the law right now, says the site is Goal 18 eligible. The city's code says if a lesser structure won't work, they qualify for a revetment. You've heard Adam speak twice now on why these lesser structures won't work. Textile burritos get destroyed by that evulsive energy that you saw in my video, you saw in Ms. Turner's video. This isn't a small force. It's a very dangerous force. We all know that. We warn people about it every storm season. Couple other things that were mentioned, Ms. Turner said this all started with the applicant saying, I want riprap, citing to Adam's initial assessment from early 2024. That's not when this started. This started about 2 decades ago when the first erosion control measure was tried here. The vegetated berm was put in that was washed away. Ms. Turner said, hey, that stayed in place for 15 years. No, that's not right. It eroded away quickly, and the bluff continued to erode closer and closer to the Seagulls' home as documented in Adam's initial assessment. Then the Seagulls tried a cobble berm and designed that thing as requested by OPRD. Came through permitting at the city, came through permitting at OPRD, and installed what they were exactly told to install by OPRD. And fingers have been tried to point that like, oh, maybe that was designed wrong. It was designed exactly how OPRD put it. Kevin spoke last month on whether there was some different way to design that cobble berm, given the constraints of the site and the small location. He said, no, not really. You're welcome to ask him here if you think I'm misrepresenting that in some way. So this actually started a long time ago. The Seagulls have tried a couple of different lesser measures and they failed. Now there seems to be a lot of debate, at least in my presentation today and what we heard from Ms. Turner, about whether some sort of clay or soil burrito structure could work. Adam has said definitively it will not work at the site given the wave energy at the site. I believe him. We've had a lot of opinions from folks that are not engineering geologists about why they think something else might work. They're just not an expert in this subject. Kevin Herkamp got mentioned again, got the city real focused on this issue, came in and told the city about how all these lesser measures could work great and how they just don't have any negative impact on the beach. Both those things are not wholly accurate. These lesser measures do not work at every site, as you heard from Adam. And the lesser measures do have negative impacts. People keep asserting that these clay burrito structures won't destroy the beach. If they're functioning, they hold back sediment in the same way and hold the berm location in the same location. I don't know why they would have any different impact than a traditional revetment. I think if the city honestly looks at the facts in this case and honestly considers the situation at the Seagull site and the failures that have occurred at the other vegetated burrito sites, it will reach the unavoidable conclusion that what would work here is a revetment and that the lesser structures would not work. Thank you very much for your consideration. I'll pause in case you have any questions for Adam or me before we deliberate. Actually, I don't know if you can't deliberate. Do you have any questions?
I'm curious. I have a question now. What was your question? You said you don't know if we can deliberate.
Yeah, I asked Bill.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure we're due an opportunity to rebut all the facts that were presented today.
Sure. Are there any questions for the applicant? Are there any further proposals by any of you? That's it?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Close and move to deliberation. Or talk to Bill about deliberation. We're an hour and a half in.
Yeah.
I'm going to give us a 2-minute break.
Sure.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Bill Tobiasman.
Yes.
A question was brought up about our ability to deliberate at this point, given where we are in this process. Do you have any?
Yeah. So because we went with the continuance and not with the leaving the record open, what we did tonight, consistent with the rules, was provide an opportunity for persons to present new evidence, arguments, all the rest. And what the statute requires that, and I'm quoting here, if new written evidence is submitted at the continued hearing, any person may request prior to the conclusion of the continued hearing that the record be left open for at least 7 days to respond. As far as I could tell, and I'm not in the room, there was no new written evidence submitted at the hearing. There are some that came in advance of the hearing, and pretty close to the hearing, but none was submitted at the hearing. Moreover, I wasn't listening that closely, but this is the type of thing that jumps out at me if someone requests an opportunity and I didn't hear a request for an opportunity. So I don't think the Planning Commission is required to leave the record open for responsive evidence. I think you can if you want to. So that's where we are with responsive evidence. And in addition, unless waived by the applicant, the local government shall allow the applicant at least 7 days after the record is closed to all of the parties submit final written argument, no evidence. So assuming you didn't hear anything different, you'd have to give the applicant the opportunity to submit final written argument, 7 days to submit final written argument before you can deliberate. They could waive that and you could move to deliberations. But if they do not waive it, we'd have to wait at least 7 days.
So would we then open the record again, ask if they're willing to waive that and then deliberate?
If they are willing to waive that final written argument, you could move to deliberations. If they aren't, then we'll have to wait 7 days at least to deliberate.
Okay. Anybody opposed to opening the record again? Okay, so we're going to open the record again. We're going to ask that. So the question is, are you open to us closing the record and deliberating, or do you want to leave it open?
Just for land use lawyer's sake, I'd point out to Bill, the videos that came in tonight were new, but we'll waive the 7 days so you can deliberate tonight. We don't feel like we would add much to your deliberation by doing a final argument.
Okay, thank you. We'll close the record again and move to deliberations. Who would like to start?
I guess I will. The thing I find about this particular site is I think it has extraordinary circumstances. In my definition of the elevation contours, I'm constantly returning to looking at a contour map in FEMA flood maps. And there's only 3 sites along our entire coast that have the same elevational conditions that the Seagulls have. The first one is obviously the Seagulls. The second one is at Surf Stand. And the third one is in front of the Stephanie and the Ocean Lodge around Chisholm. They're all at lower elevations. And by lower elevations, I'm referencing from the edge of the bank to the top of the bank. Seagulls at 6 feet rise roughly, looking at a topographical map. Looking at the beach burritos that are successful, 1856 Pacific has 14 feet of rise between the bottom of the bank and the top of the bank. 3276 Pacific has 8 feet of rise. So, and we're seeing failures at 3276. We're at 1856, the higher rise, less impact and less channel. They're on flat plains, straight hills. The Surf Stand, which we saw the video at, is a channel. The Stephanie Inn is also a channel. And our midway site for the Seagull is very definitively a channel. So I question if, and thinking about this, if actually an alternative would work beyond the riprap. I'm in places where we have seen success, they're on straight plains. We're not looking at something that comes in at a very low elevation, which is going to increase wave funneling and power there. And as shown in the video, sort of where I'm constantly looking at these maps and wondering why do we see more erosion at this site than we would at any other site? And I keep returning to one, the elevation, the lower elevation, and also the channel that's at these 3 sites. I don't see it anywhere else along the coastline other than in the Ecola Creek area. And that's obvious because
So you mentioned it has more erosion, but the report from Earth Engineers indicated that it was eroding at about an average of 5 feet for 10 years, which is the same as the coastal average in this part of the coast. So I think I'm also questioning what does it mean to say there's more erosion? There's more wave overtopping for sure.
Oh,
But that's different than saying you're losing bluff.
I'm looking at the undercutting of shoreline there, which is very similar to what's happening at the one that we see that with the beach burrito failure. You know, I'm just sort of looking at it in an elevational standpoint, saying, okay, why is the site different than other sites? And is there a difference in this site? And I feel
I
like
think
there
that's the
may
question.
be one there, that may require something a little more excessive. You know, right next door to the 3915, we have riprap buried under sand. And I think Clay pointed this out, is that one is showing less of demise than 3915 Ocean, right next door, which has the beach burrito. So is there does this site have a circumstance that may validate the necessity for it? From that aspect.
Well, so not to argue the difference in those, but at the riprap site, I think they indicated that there's more sand on top of the riprap than there was on top of the burritos. So a 1 foot removal of sand on the burritos ended up exposing the burritos, while a 1 foot removal of sand on the riprap didn't expose it because it has 3 or 4 feet or whatever additional it has there. But I agree with your assessment. That's the same thing that I keep going back to at the subject site is, are the conditions different in this site? And it looks like from the record that's been presented to us that they are different. It's falls within that moderate wave action as opposed to where everyone else is kind of sitting at like, well, I think I want a rivet because I see some erosion. This one is within that moderate wave action area that's indicated on the map. They are seeing the same, they're seeing what we would expect from a moderate wave action. They're seeing very quickly eroding previous revetments, the pile of cobble that they put, the plantings they've done in the past.
But I think there's also a question. So for instance, people have referred to the cobble in different ways, but in fact, OPRD never permitted a shoreline structure. So when that cobble was placed, it was landscaping. That was not an attempt at a cobble berm. So I think that we have to really if you look at the permit, if there had been a true cobble berm, it would have taken a whole lot more and there would need to be a permit for it.
And that's the other side that I'm fighting with, is that I don't think they've gone fully through our procedural method of.
And I think that that's
requesting.
but I think that that's where we do have, it's a very complicated balance because yes, we have property owners, but we also have the entire citizenry of Cannon Beach and all of the visitors that come here. And it's not like we're trying to say one family can't have their home. We're trying to say everyone needs a balance ability. And to me, that balance should be, have we exhausted the other possibilities, which is what our code requires, to exhaust the possibilities. And I personally feel that what we have gotten from tonight in the previous packet is an example of one expert being able to say that they do not believe something would work that they've never done, but are looking at from the outside. And if I had heard from an expert who said, I am an engineer of this method, I install these and I would not install this at this site, or I've installed at this site and it failed. Absolutely, 100%. At that point, we've done what the code requires. And I think that then we're striking the balance of this home is about to be destroyed, but the bluff isn't that close. So there is time to say there's time to go through the process. If the bluff was 5 feet from the home, obviously that's a different scenario because there's no time to go through the process.
That's the challenge I'm having.
It is a challenge.
Internally myself.
Right. It's very difficult.
Because we have a procedure.
Right.
Which procedure do you think they missed?
The going through the engineering of the beach burrito and the stabilization of a more natural method than directly.
So I'm still a little bit in the dark. Are you suggesting that they didn't try all those methods? I don't read our code as requiring that. I read our code as requiring consideration of those methods and an engineering report that eliminates all those that aren't gonna work. I think in that sense, they have complied with our procedure. Now, you can argue whether you believe the applicant or you believe the opposition. I find it pretty persuasive that we have one engineer in the room. And he did a pretty good job of saying, at least to me, what I heard is, it's not gonna work. The clay burrito, the cobble berm, whatever, it's not gonna work. I appreciate the arguments that have come out against this. And I want to protect the beach as much as possible. But in this situation, we have actually an applicant who's actually done more than we've ever seen anybody do. And now they're facing the situation where, you know, those cobble berms are not holding up. I hate to substitute my judgment for the judgment of their engineers.
We also have two additional engineers that are saying the same thing.
Mhm.
Now, not just the one in the room. Yeah. Our engineers from.
The thing
It's one firm though. It's one firm.
The thing that really confused me is the argument that they had to prove that the other methods wouldn't work. And God bless me, I don't know how the hell they're gonna do that. You cannot prove the negative.
Well, you would install it. And it would fail. That's how you prove it.
I don't read our code as requiring they install it and see it fail.
Well, that means, you know, your definition of how you support the minimum, you know, is, you know, I suppose that's up for, you know, interpretation, but between us all. But if you could unequivocally, positively say it absolutely won't work, then I would say it's satisfied. Did you hear anything tonight that you say, I unequivocally, positively know it won't work based on the support that was given for the
Right.
property?
The evidence presented, yeah, I heard that.
So to me, I didn't hear that those cobble berms weren't working. I heard that they're being undercut. I heard that over time, there will be an issue if you don't continue to add sand. But what I saw were examples of bluffs that were, despite the failed burritos, still intact.
Well, and what I heard was, and this whole argument, whether they failed or didn't fail, seems, in my opinion, to be a little misguided. The question is, are they compromised? And were they compromised after that first storm, and were they compromised worse after the second storm, and what's gonna happen next month when the next king tide comes?
What does compromise?
Compromise means they will fail under the right circumstances. You won't get the benefit of, did I hear somebody?
Well, but
go ahead, Rick.
Mike, if they weren't installed properly in the first place with the proper vegetation nurtured properly, then they're set up to fail. So how do we jump to, I mean, it seems like this applicant went straight for riprap and nothing else, hired a firm that specializes in riprap, not a firm that specializes in the clay burritos. And if it's installed properly with the proper slope and the proper vegetation, it has a chance to survive.
It does. I'm not arguing that, Aaron, and I, you know, it's not an easy question for me either, but what I see here is a unique situation, and we have an engineer that comes in, and what we're doing is taking a generalized testimony, and we all know riprap is bad, or we think we know it. In response to the engineering and the maintenance, you can't find 3 people in this room who can agree on what that is in this environment. They'll all disagree. We've heard willow doesn't work, but we've heard that grass will work. Or willow will, but grass won't, but we've heard it will. And, you know, frankly, nobody knows that. So we're dealing right here with a list of unknowns and a lot of speculation based upon a generalized, and I think a correct scientific interpretation that riprap might jeopardize our beach. But what I see here is somebody who has followed our procedure, at least in terms of what we require, and it doesn't require them to go through every step to try every option before they get to riprap. In fact, and it's been pointed out, our code doesn't even talk about clay burritos. So in a sense, they kind of did do everything our code requires.
Just to point this out, clay burritos are also a form of vegetative stabilization. So they are part of this category of priorities.
Okay.
What's different for you, Mike, about this application versus Stephanie and application where we had another low point, we had geologists telling us the other alternatives won't work. We had a compromised system in place. How do you feel differently?
Well, I feel differently in this case because that was a revetment that was armored. I mean, it might not be working up to snuff, but it was armored. It's not, I mean, I went and looked again at it, that bluff, at least the amount of sand that's packed back into that other undercut has changed again since our last hearing. You know, so again, I have an engineer who's telling me, hey, we need this, it's required. And we have a bunch of data that says they're bad, but nothing's looking specifically at that property and saying, this might work here, except what they've done. And we have no, I mean, I love Diana, but it's a lot of speculation on her part.
So we also have the benefit of people who can fund an expert. We don't have anyone funding an expert on that clay burritos.
Right.
If we had that, then I would say yes. If that person came in and said, I've been paid to do the analysis and this is not the right spot. That's the evidence that is indicative because it's somebody who actually installs that type of structure.
Well, these guys have said they're doing one in somewhere down south. So I think they know what they're doing. I'm sorry.
It also did 3915 Ocean as well, did they not?
I don't believe so.
Well, they mentioned they did, and that again is a riprap, right? That's covered with sand and somebody tried to plant. The last thing is, I don't know what the costs are. I have somebody who's worked in the industry says $75,000. I've had somebody who probably knows based upon some generalized information that it might be less. Are we going to ask people to go in and spend $75,000 after every storm to make to make sure that we don't put revetment in?
Okay, cost is definitely not in the code. So that is not part of the consideration.
It is in my.
Also, coming in after the storm means adding some sand. It doesn't mean rebuilding the structure.
It does. I say that's again, this code is.
That's all that's been done on the current clay burritos.
We have the shoreline protection structure shall be the minimum necessary to provide the level of protection required. My God, I can't even apply that. I don't even know what that means. All I know is we had an engineer come in and said, we need it. It has to happen. That's all I think.
So the minimum necessary is the most armored approach, period.
It could be in this case, yeah. I mean,
That's what
This
you'd have
isn't
to
the
find.
most armored approach, though. There's two additional steps that could be taken above and beyond where this application is at. This application is for a vegetated riprap, similar to what was approved a year ago, that was presented to us there, where you've got the riprap buried under how many ever feet of sand and then planted additionally. So I really think there was a mistake made on that one that didn't require willows. Like there was some additional things that should have been there on that would make that a much more effective vegetation maintaining the sand there, but this isn't the most armored approach. There is just regular seawall or regular riprap and then a seawall, which would both be significantly more armored than what's being proposed in front of us here.
We're at 3 of 5, right?
I'm sorry.
We're at 3 of 5. Proper maintenance, existing riprap vegetation, planting riprap vegetation, vegetated riprap, which they're requesting. And then we have non-vegetated riprap and bulkhead seawall. So we're at phase 3 of 5.
And on the meeting, the July 2023, our joint meeting where OPA and everyone came, I was reviewing that today. They have a list of theirs that there's actually seven steps, and this is right in the smack dab middle of it. This is what they refer to as a hybrid. And then you've got a couple other, I can't remember what they all were that were above and beyond armored, but it was seawall obviously is the final one, but.
And then God forbid these people here are in between revetments. So obviously they're taking a much bigger punishment from that water and that energy that's being diverted toward their unarmored shoreline. So, in a sense, they are victims of riprap and they are in a very precarious position and come in and in my opinion, establish the minimum necessary.
Les, what are you thinking?
Oh, hi, Clay.
Hi.
Yeah, this is very difficult. I have tried to simplify it in my own mind by trying to stick as closely to what our code requires and not get too tangled up. I don't have to know why it worked in other places. I simply have to understand what would work in this one spot. And as I understand it, the softer approaches have been tried. What's not been tried is a true burrito style vegetated seawall protection. And I struggle with, well, how do you know whether that would work or not if you haven't tried it? I mean, to me, that's the crux of the problem. I'm an engineer myself, and I tend to believe what engineers tell me. I've heard quite a bit of testimony that this is not the appropriate place for that. And the next allowable approach is the one that they're requesting, the vegetated riprap. It's a very subtle point, and I don't really understand what the perfect answer is, but I do feel strongly for the owners. I have personal experience. It tells me that an unarmored lot surrounded by armored lots gets hammered in a hurricane. And I suspect that they see the same kind of effect on the Oregon coast as well. I think the question is simply, how do they have to prove they've done the minimum necessary? And I'm still listening to the dialogue. I haven't quite made up my mind.
If part of your thought is how do you prove it doesn't work until you've put it in, couldn't you also apply that to say the second level versus the rock? Or more specifically, a clay burrito system? Would that same logic work for you in terms of feeling like you had covered a process for establishing that the minimum had been explored?
Well, I mean, forgive me if I've got the facts wrong. I believe they have tried just planting riparian vegetation. I've heard that they put in some cobble about a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, at the base of that to try to limit the toe erosion. That all got washed away. I mean, to me, they tried the softest approaches, and they simply didn't seem to be very effective.
But to me, I would say the difference is that the clay burritos, the benefit of them is that they allow the planting to take hold over time, and specifically willow, not grass, so that the roots become part of the structure of the bank. That has not been tried when we talk about planting riparian vegetation. The clay burritos become part of a vegetation approach. But this site, given that when we look at those photos, there is so much grass there, it's not as though it's being constantly scoured. Proper maintenance of the plants themselves, done at the right time of year. I think that that's a vegetative approach that has not been attempted.
The thing is, Mickey, the grass, the salal is listed as an acceptable option in the code. To require them now to step outside our code and say, well, we were wrong about that. We really think willow is the best approach. That's us imposing our judgment over and above what the code is requiring right now.
The code also allows willow. And if we have data from someone's dissertation that in fact grass is poor for banks and causes more erosion, I think that's a good basis to say use willow. In our previous Mike Morgan cobalt style, whatever we want to call that vegetation process, we always said willow. That was always part of the condition.
I think we're all just kind of grasping for what the right solution is and none of us really know what it is. And these people have come in and said, we have proven to you, we believe the only solution to our property is the revetment they proposed. And that's all we can ask in the code.
Well, we are here to to think of the benefits to the entire community.
I know.
And so, of course, if I were a landowner, yes, that's probably what I would come and ask for too. But is that what our code tells us to do when we balance the needs of the entire community and the beach versus landowners? It's because we're not supposed to think as the landowner, we're supposed to think as the community and the community as a whole. And that's a more difficult balancing act.
I am thinking of the community and I'm thinking of all those people out there. I mean, there are half a dozen homes out there that stand a real possibility of getting swamped within the next.
What about the people on the beach? Who don't have the privilege to own a home on the beach, but are.
I don't know. I mean, we've had riprap out there for how many years and we have a pretty wide beach still. You know, I just don't know what the answer is. I mean, we have the academia. We had actually one study that went into our littoral. Is that how you pronounce that? Littoral. And that concluded the beach grass might not be the right approach. Is that the one you're referring to?
No, there's a different study.
Okay.
It's a recent dissertation.
Okay.
It's in our packet. It was provided by Friends of the Dunes. If you look at aerial photos of portions of, for instance, I think it's Lincoln City, and look at the photo of the beach is already narrower along the riprap areas versus where they're not. And I think if you walk this beach here, you would see something similar, that it is wider in the spaces where there's not riprap. So it happens, and I think it is a scientific fact that it's a process that occurs.
Yeah,
The whole state has developed Goal 18. The state doesn't just make those decisions arbitrarily.
No, but the state also said somebody who qualifies, whose house was developed before 1977 can come in and get riprap from the state. And we've said, well, wait a minute. We want to put some more stuff on top of this. And the stuff is fully laid out in here and they've met it.
Well, goal 18 doesn't say they can put riprap. It lists that they can do something to it. But goal 18 also does say that it's the aim is to limit riprap. It's not to prohibit riprap entirely. And I think this is in my mind, looking at this is an instance where this is a property that is seeing heavier wave action than other properties along that same area. That looking at something like this vegetated riprap seems to be the option that is most fitting to be able to protect this property to the minimum level that is going to stop it from going backwards or slow it from going backwards.
I agree with you, Eric. I'm sorry, I agree with you.
Anyone else? Someone want to make a motion?
I kind of want to talk about some additional conditions that weren't included in the conditions. There was. It just mentions that for condition 3 that's listed, preferred vegetation planting per 4D management guide. I would really feel strongly that we specify
Willow, yeah.
Hooker willow,
Yeah.
and or other native willow species that the surrounding properties have that as existing vegetation, and I think that would be something that was sorely missed on that other revetment that was approved, that it was just planted with grasses, even though I feel like I remember that was within the conditions.
Yeah,
But
it was.
I don't know what the enforcement of that comes down to, because it obviously wasn't done at that other property.
Look at the conditions. All right, hang on.
In our packet is page 12.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions of what enforcement
I think that,
things are available?
you have on number 3. Can I take a look at that once? I think there's, you could be specific And then one of the things that we could get as part of that is an updated plan for the vegetated riprap that they have already that specifies that it is the hooker willow. So in their specification sheet that they submitted, we could just ask for that to be resubmitted with that shown on there, and then it would be a matter of administration.
So
The same applicants agreed to Willow when Mike Morgan did his process, but there's now grass there. So what's the enforcement
that's the
in
question.
actually making sure it happens?
Us.
It has,
I can't tell you what happened before. I don't know. So
What enforcement power do you have though to make that happen? Is it?
the plans,
after
condition,
after it's been approved and done, what can you do to enforce it?
we, just like anything else that happens after the fact,
Which is,
we administer the code.
So are there fees?
There would be code enforcement would be sent out with the specific condition and they would have to do what's necessary to meet the condition. So what I'm saying is it would be good to have the spec updated, showing exactly. So that's also in there. And then it's going to be up to staff. I don't have a better answer for you. I don't know what's gone on in the past. Can't speak to it.
Does this have sort of final approval like buildings where it has to be inspected prior to completion of the work?
Not necessarily. I mean, we go out there to take a look at it to
See that.
exactly, right.
I think the problem is maintenance.
Yeah.
So, with wetland mitigation, for instance, if you don't check on it every year, it looks great for the first month and then it's dead.
If you guys got a better answer, let us know.
Well, no, we're looking to you. We're asking.
And I gave you my answer.
Well, we have a code enforcement officer. And I think that should become, part of his
Right.
job.
Without any sort of,
Without neighbors having to call and.
well,
That's pretty much how all enforcement takes place.
without some sort of specific mechanism, I don't see
Yeah.
what, we've all talked about, and the applicants talked about, ultimately all of these are going to be damaged to different levels. So how do we ensure that they're maintained? I don't have the answer. It would seem that if the idea is all of these ultimately are going to fail at varying timescales, that some sort of future reapproval or review would be considering how they stuck to the plan, how any applicant stuck to a proposed plan. We saw that with dune grading at different times, promises were made, it didn't happen. There was really no enforcement, then nothing happened. So if we're going to look at imposing conditions, I think we need to have conditions that actually have a chance of being held. And we'd have to think differently about them than we have in the past because if dune grading is the easiest example, it was hard to get that enforcement, whether it's the grass or whether the stand went, it was really tough to enforce that.
So are you saying on a condition of approval that they have to prove that if they come back, they have to prove that they have one done as they were?
No, I think it would be, and again, I'm making this up, we may need Bill on this, but it would be more, there are annual inspections, there's a level of maintenance that's required to these. We know maintenance, whether a clay burrito, a vegetative revetment, they all need maintenance. I mean, both those two examples that are right next to each other already need maintenance at varying levels. What is the time period where that happens? What is the expectation for what happens? And what happens if it doesn't? And the only thing I can see from right now, in terms of what happens if it doesn't happen, is when you come back to us and you haven't done anything, we're going to think about what was promised and what actually, and what was done. And that will be weighed in our consideration or future planning commission's consideration. I can't think of anything else besides jumping into something we're not going to do here tonight. A specific penalty bracket, it's not going to happen. We'll never agree on that.
So this suggested condition 4 is yearly monitoring of area by photographic documentation for 5 years provided to the city by the applicant. I think something like that was included in the last one. Have you guys received photos specifically denoting what's been done to the other one that was approved in 23?
I can't speak to that, no.
No, we don't get these.
Okay.
Catch 22.
Yes, it's a real catch 22.
We have a code enforcement issue in the city, but it affects every part of our land use code. It'd be nice to fix that at some point, but we are what we are.
Well, I think we all agree it needs to be maintained, and I think we could all agree mechanisms for enforcing maintenance up to this point are not happening. So what would we do different? If this were,
The only thing we have is to put something like Aaron had just suggested, is to put that as a condition and, you know,
The
it's,
conditions need to be in there,
Well,
because if they're not in there, then we got nothing.
can a condition be that they come back with a quote, some, I don't know what a reapplication would look like of, or an update or whatever in front of the planning commission after X time frame? Is that something that's,
Results of that reapplication. Remove it? I mean,
yeah,
once you put it in, it's a little like
Yeah.
taking out a dam. It's
Mhm.
pretty difficult, right?
I don't know.
I think that's where we
Yeah.
get stuck, right?
Well, it is a trigger sort of it's a forcing function on maintenance. That's,
It's us in OPR.
well, I think the law, right? If they have to come in and present to us. And I guess there's the question of what happens if they don't come in and present.
No one's gonna remember this.
Yeah,
well, what about future approvals shall be subject to review of past compliance to maintenance agreement?
We already.
Future maintenance,
But then that would have to be on the deed somewhere. I mean, where else would that be recorded? Because
okay,
for
so we start
longevity's
with the
purpose.
approval on the permit. And yeah, I mean, the deed would be the easiest, I mean, the strongest.
Yeah.
Put it on a deed.
I think the best we could do is put it in as a condition of approval
mhm.
at this point. Just based on what our abilities are as a committee.
I think the deed's too strong, but to your point, Mike, you know, not in a bigger picture, not tonight maybe, but not in a bigger picture. If we're going to allow these revetments to be put in and we don't have a way to keep them from being hard, we need to figure out how to do that.
Because without any maintenance on this particular revetment, you just put it in and let it sit there. The sand's gonna get washed away and it's gonna look like
be a
the
hard-
other ones. It's gonna turn it from the hybrid revetment to riprap.
Yes.
And it's just gonna be riprap if the maintenance isn't followed, if the plantings aren't kept up with and the sand replenished to ensure that those plantings are successful.
But what if we put in something like, a condition that goes something like, if at any time, you know, it's found that the berm has, or the revetment has not been maintained, that the applicant will complete the maintenance within 2 months of notice.
Well, along that line, you could take the applicant or the city. You could come back and say the city will do it. If
Or
the applicant-
At the
At the
applicant's
applicant's
cost.
cost.
At the cost of it.
You didn't like that one?
You can do whatever you want.
That's incentive for sure.
Okay, we got approval to do anything we want.
Bill, you hearing this?
I am hearing it, and getting conditions of approval that work. You know, I mean, the reality is, as you've been discussing, the issue isn't necessarily the condition. The issue is always the enforcement, you know, and how do you make sure that that happens given limited resources and the way enforcement happens. And this is something cities throughout the state struggle with. I would encourage you to focus on what do you want to see happen, and then perhaps we can work through a mechanism. And you know, I'm sure Steve and I can talk about some things and come up with a plan that we could bring it back to you if that's where you're headed.
I think the main thing that we're talking about now is that what we'd like to see happen is these structures, regardless of clay burrito or hard revetment, to be maintained and maintained in the way they were said they would be. And so we're trying to figure out how to get that to happen. The last idea was the owner, applicant, does it. If they don't do the maintenance, the city can come in and do the maintenance at the owner's cost.
I think we could put together a condition that could do that.
Okay.
We can go on private property, Bill, and do whatever we want on it.
As part of the granting of the permit, we would have, a license or an easement granted to the city to allow, the city to access that property. Remember, one of the reasons why they go to OPRD is that it happens on the public portion of the beach, at least a portion of it, depending on where things are. So certainly we could access that, but we could also work on some other, language as well.
I think that's helpful.
It's definitely helpful. The concern I have with that is what just stops someone from being like, I'm just not gonna do it. The city will do it eventually and they'll just charge me.
They know
That's what's gonna happen because no one's maintaining anything. I mean, in essence, that's what you're gonna get. Because we've just talked about the issue. The issue is people put it in and they don't maintain it. So that's the issue. I shouldn't say that to everyone, but why do you think we're seeing all these? Because that's what they're doing. So I would expect that to continue.
Which is a good reason not to put in something that's gonna turn into hard armor.
Eric, you started with some things you wanted to address. Do you feel like you?
I think I talked through most of the things. The other point just to in reference to the vegetated burritos failing at the other structures. Those after 1 year, two or I guess it was 2 years of failing, the structure itself was failing as designed as a structure. While the riprap, the blanket would fail as opposed to the structure itself would fail. So it would just require the maintenance to correct that as opposed to a rebuild of the structure to make the structure function as it was designed to function.
I think we didn't have an affirmative answer about the depth, of the sand blanket that was put on the burritos versus the riprap.
Yeah.
So if we're just talking about how long it takes to move through a sand blanket, it sounds like that riprap project that was discussed had a much better, quote unquote, sand blanket.
Yeah.
And if that same blanket was on the burritos, it too would wear away for a while. If you replenish the sand, it's not going to make it down to the burritos. So I think there's also, again, we're trying to compare apples and oranges because we have structures that were designed by different people at different times, provided with different cover. And then we say, well, none of these work for this. They've been done a bunch of different ways. So I don't feel that we've actually had a comparison of actual projects that we can look and say, this is the same thing that if it was over here, it would work or would not work.
I don't think that's going to be something we could ever get.
No, I agree.
Because every site is different. Every site is
exactly
slightly different wave action.
It's interesting though, and this was where I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
It's interesting though, because for me, it's like, yeah, we're never going to get apples and apples. But two lots right next to each other is about as close as we're going to see. Presumably both low at the same elevation. And yet you have one structure that was breached and one was not. Forget about how strong they are. Did the waves get to the structure? And they got to the clay burrito and they didn't get to the riprap. We don't see any riprap exposed, but yet we see all kinds of the clay burrito or whatever kind of burrito it was. I felt confident I had that answer. So one structure failed, but the other didn't even get tested. Why is that? Well, it has to be with the way they laid them out. I mean, and the angle there and how much clay they had up on top.
Or it could have been that structure and that site just wasn't sufficient to hold back the ocean.
But here's the point. If two structures are at the same place.
One is riprap and one is not.
But the
And they
riprap didn't get
wanted the
tested.
code.
It was just the sand on the surface that was tested over the riprap.
True.
So it
So-
never got, for
so we
whatever
don't-
reason,
Yeah.
it wasn't tested.
Oh, it's just another unknown. I don't know how you deal with it.
Anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? All right, well, I feel like we're ready for some kind of motion here. Let's see where we're at. Anyone want to make a motion?
If you want to do that.
I
You should, you're leaving anyway.
can make motion, yeah.
Deal with this later.
No, I'm unclear of the specific verbiage for what would be condition of approval 3. But I might be able to work my way through it. I move that we approve this vegetated riprap with the following conditions. As listed in the packet, condition 1, the applicant shall coordinate with OPRD, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and obtain all permits required for this work, including beach access for vehicles. Condition 2, as-built plans of the revetment shall be provided to the city upon completion of the construction. Condition 3, planning commission. This is the one,
First.
well, I guess I'll call it condition 3 is the, I don't know how to phrase it with.
Vegetation shall be hooker rollers.
Yeah, vegetation shall be hooker willows or equivalent native willow species. As per the four dune management plan, the list of plants in the 4 dune management plan. Condition 4, yearly monitoring of the area by photographic documentation for a period of 5 years, provided to the city by the applicant. And then condition 5, city staff shall be notified prior to the start of work and be present during construction.
I think there was a 6 and that staff would work with land use council to come up with a condition that required maintenance if the applicant is notified at any point in time. Wasn't that what we were?
And then we did discuss that. I like that condition. I just don't know the
Well, that's
exact verbiage is that.
Bill and Steve were gonna give us out at 4.
Well, I think you can get it close and then maybe we can get it from
So condition 6, if the applicant is found to have not complied with the conditions of approval at any time, they shall be given written notice, and if
And have 2 months to complete the maintenance.
if after 60 days of written notice have not complied, the city will complete the required maintenance at the cost of the property owner.
So what is the required maintenance? And start with planting. Does it have to be replanted? Does it have to have sand put back on top of it? What are the specifics behind our,
So is one of the conditions maintaining a sand blanket,
it sounds like that. would-
Maintenance the sand
sand blanket and
maintenance of
a
the
viable
vegetative-
hooker's willow.
Vegetation.
Yeah.
Including replanting.
Yeah.
A second.
For the discussion?
I think for the yearly monitoring, it would be good to have, like, say, for example, a date certain, like a 12/31 of the year, so that instead of each one that comes in, we have different dates. At least we can kind of try to start a uniform date in terms of when those are to be submitted to us. So instead of each one having its own.
Okay, so condition 4, provided to the city by the applicant by December 31st of each year.
Should we do it at a point where they'd be able to get the most planting, because there may still be damage after December?
Well, I was thinking if they're doing it yearly.
I would suggest,
They would just have to submit their report to the city by December 31st of whatever maintenance they did for that year.
I would actually suggest something along the lines of March 31st. The reason being is that these repair requests come in seasonal, kind of a seasonal nature. They typically come in after winter.
After it's been beat down.
Eric, you mentioned 5 years. What was your thinking behind the 5 years?
That was what was suggested in the
Conditions.
in the conditions that were offered by staff as potential conditions. I'm up to discuss if we want to talk longer time frame, whatever, however.
Well, it just seems like it's maintenance from what we've heard is
Annual.
annual. And I wouldn't know that. My takeaway is it's as long as you have a structure there, you're maintaining it. If you want a structure there.
Yeah.
So it seems to me to make sense just to have a longer period of time. Just, this is a condition of having a structure here, is you have to annually maintain it.
Yeah, I'm fine with just eliminating that for the period of 5 years, just. Just
Yeah.
submit a photo.
Bill might have something to say.
After 10 or 15 years or whatever, it's just gonna be photos of a wall of Hooker Willow and good to go, I would think.
Yeah.
That's what I hope.
It'll be easy for him.
Bill, anything on term?
It's always hard to, the term of it for the life of the structure would be my guess. And, if the maintenance of a particular revetment doesn't require any maintenance, then that's what it is. But, it's like, I would say the life of the structure.
Instead of a period of 5 years for the life of the structure.
Okay. Okay, any further discussion? No? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Blaylock,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
No.
Commissioner Sinclair,
No.
Commissioner Moritz,
No.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Sharon Newton.
No. Application is denied.
With that, I don't know if the committee wants us to make a tentative decision and have findings brought back for your consideration. Do we want the chair to sign staff drafting them?
We've said no.
So I was no on a motion to approve, so you would need a motion to deny. And then
Typically, when we've done the tentative, it has been to make sure that the language was clear and what we intended. That seems pretty straightforward.
So I think what Eric was saying was the motion failed. So Bill, do we have to do another motion?
If the motion failed, then, it's still before the planning commission and
We got
somebody
no
can
action.
Okay, so,
Right, we have to do that.
make a motion in the other direction or try different conditions.
all right, let's try again.
Okay.
I guess the discussion would be. Think it through.
I think you do need a review. Make it tentative, you
Well,
need
we didn't even get a review. We didn't even get to review.
on the,
Right now, we got a motion that failed.
I know,
We got no motion
okay.
for a decision.
The hope was that having some conditions would maybe make it easier for some of the no's to
Yeah, I'm done.
say yes, and obviously that was not the case.
Right. So the next motion is,
To deny.
there's only one other motion.
I understand where we are. I'm also trying to protect our process.
I understand.
I'm just here sitting here.
I get it.
So, does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to the conversation, given what we've just been through and the conversation we've had to this point? No. Okay. Would anyone else like to make a motion?
I move to deny the application.
Have a second. Further discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
No.
Commissioner Orloff,
No.
Commissioner Bates.
No,
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Sharon Newton.
Yes. Okay. Application is denied for the conditional use permit. Do we need a break?
So I think still working on that. Are we making a tentative decision and asking staff to draft findings? Because we would need a motion to do that if you guys so choose.
View the findings.
Okay, all right.
So then we had to figure out a meeting date.
So what is the staff holidays?
Into next week, we work Monday and Friday. I'm not sure what the turnaround can be in terms of this week yet. Bill, any sort of thoughts, comments, any thoughts on that? I don't know if, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think, at least a few days to turn it around. Certainly, we aim to get things up so there's enough time for the planning commission to review it prior to the meeting. I don't think we need a full 7-day because we're not having a public hearing. But yeah, it's tough, because the Christmas holidays is right about the sweet spot of what we'd want. So
Monday work for people?
Yeah, I'm working Monday.
Yeah.
Does Monday work? Bill, do we think we could have something turned around by like Friday of this week so we can get that out to the board or to the commission this weekend and then meet sometime on Monday?
I think we could probably do that. It would be helpful if the folks who prevailed in the last motion gave at least someone a bullet point of the concerns that we can translate into findings would be helpful.
Happy to email you what I thought the main points of conversation.
That'd be great.
Sounds good. Do we know do we have any type of calendar as far as Monday and meetings and what times?
I don't think there's gonna be much. Everything's probably gonna be pretty quiet.
Don't know if there's times that work better for people.
Probably around lunchtime is gonna be a little better for me.
No public.
12 o'clock on Monday. Would 12, 1, any preference, either of those? 12?
Noon.
Okay,
Noon.
all right. I'll call in.
Okay, let's take a 2-minute break. Well, we start our meeting. Continue.
We could restart.
I need it. Rich.
You
All
want
right.
the last 2.5 hours back.
Here's my coffee.
I think Jamie's not in the room. Yeah.
No, he's not.
Oh, where did that? You're gonna hold off for a
Oh,
minute,
just left.
to wait for the applicant. So,
There he is.
okay. Good.
We're not using.
All right, our next item is a quasi judicial hearing regarding public hearing CU 2406, Jamie Lerma of Red Crow LLC applying for a conditional use permit. Jamie Lerma of Red Crow LLC, application for conditional use permit for excavation in a wetland buffer area for the purpose of installing stormwater infrastructure on Forest Lawn Road. Project location is in the Forest Lawn right of way. It is the property at 1511 and 1541 Forest Lawn. This application will be reviewed against the criteria of municipal code 17.102, wetland overlay zone, and 17.86 conditional uses. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or personal conflict of interest?
Yeah, the prior decisions, the conditional use, decision was made before my involvement with this project, but I am inherently tied to this project because of my current standing.
Okay.
And I will recuse myself from this.
Okay.
I have neither, but I have recused myself on this project with this applicant before, and I feel like in interest of consistency, I should recuse again.
Okay. You guys Make yourselves comfortable out there in the audience. Okay, staff report.
Thank you. The applicant requests a conditional use permit for relocating a stormwater outfall on the subject property's southwestern corner to a location approximately 140 to 175 feet to the north. The project will be carried out in conjunction with approved residential development at 1511 and 1541 Forest Lawn Road. The existing stormwater outfall location is within an area that will be developed with a driveway accessing a detached garage that will provide off-street parking for the residential development. The relocation of the stormwater outfall was previously approved by the city through development permit DP 22-19 that was issued on December 16th, 2022. This decision was appealed to the planning commission in file AA number 2301. And during a March 2023 public hearing, the 6 members of the planning commission who were present became, quote, hopelessly deadlocked and were unable to make a determination. As a result, the administrative appeal was upheld. This matter was then appealed to the city council, who overturned the outcome of the planning commission's hearing and approved the original development permit during a May 2023 public hearing. The work authorized by DP 2219 was not completed prior to the expiration of that permit. Since the issuance of that permit, the city has adopted revisions to the wetland overlay ordinance, which expanded the size of wetland buffer areas from 5 to 50 feet, and made other changes to the review procedure for development activities within the overlay zone. As a result of these changes in rulemaking, DP 2219 cannot be renewed or replaced with a similar administrative decision, and review by the planning commission is necessary. Moving into the applicable criteria. The Cannon Beach Municipal Code requires development permit activities such as stormwater management within the wetland overlay zone require review and approval by the planning commission. This is detailed in table 17.102-1, the review procedure for development activities within the wetland overlay zone. In the wetland overlay zone requirements for development standards, the proposed work will be located in the public right-of-way, which is within the 50-foot buffer area that was expanded due to recent rulemaking. The residential development on the subject property has been reviewed and approved by both the Planning Commission and Design Review Board. The wetland delineation that was prepared for the residential development has been reviewed by the Oregon Department of State Lands and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This delineation is less than 5 years old, and the DSL approval does not expire until June of 2026. Regarding development standards and approval criteria for development exempt from wetland lot of record requirements, the application is exempt from wetland lot of record requirements as a development type meets criteria number 5, stormwater management. Regarding development standards for stormwater management, the staff comment is that the proposed work is intended to change the location of the outfall in relation to local wetland inventory site number 24 in order to accommodate residential development currently under construction. No stormwater will be diverted from the wetland as a result of this project. Exhibit A3 consists of a letter prepared by John Van Staveren, a wetland scientist with Pacific Habitat Services, which indicates that the proposal will not alter the wetland's hydrology, as Site 24 is primarily supported by a shallow groundwater table. Mr. Van Staveren states, quote, I have reviewed the proposed pipe installation project considering Chapter 17-102 Wetlands Overlay Zone and found that it will have no negative effect on the wetland and is in keeping with the overlay's purpose, which is to protect wetland areas identified in the city's local wetland inventory from uses and activities that are inconsistent with the maintenance of the wetland functions and values identified for those sites. The relocation of the stormwater discharge point will not alter the wetland's hydrology, which is primarily supported by a shallow groundwater table. No trees will be removed, and all disturbed areas will restore their original condition, close quote. Moving into development standards for construction, the proposed work will not require the removal of material project area. Displaced soils will be used to cover the excavated trench after the installation of the new pipe. Moving to conditional uses. Staff comment for overall use standards is that the current stormwater outfall is located in an area that will be developed to provide access to the subject property. Due to the characteristics of Site 24, there are limited opportunities for the placement of structures or other improvements such as driveways and sidewalks. The approved site plan from DRB number 24-03, southwestern portion of the subject property is excerpted in the staff report. And this shows a shared garage / storage building and an asphalt driveway located in approximately the same area as the existing stormwater outfall and its area of discharge. Continuing on, there are no identified impacts to traffic or congestion on Forest Lawn that will occur as a result of the project. The project will not adversely affect the approved layout for the residential development on the property. And the site's characteristics are appropriate for the proposal as the wetland already serves as a natural catchment for stormwater. The proposal will not adversely affect access points, loading and unloading areas, or refuse collection at the subject property. Relocation of the stormwater outfall resolves a conflict between the current location and the development that is currently under construction. And this application will not result in any changes from the design of the development that was approved by the design review board. And that concludes the staff report.
Okay. We'll call for public testimony. The pertinent criteria to be considered are noted in the staff report listed on the criteria sheets of the page of the city's website. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal code which the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional testimony, arguments, or evidence regarding the application. The Planning Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing or leaving the record open for additional written testimony, arguments, or evidence. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the chair, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. Is there a presentation by the applicant? Come on down.
Hello.
Hi.
Jamie Lerma, P.O. Box 825 Kennedy, Georgia. I'm the builder of the residential project and I'm representing the owner. That report was thorough. There are approximately 200 pages of information about this project in the information. But I wanted to break it down to a few basic components. And the first one is that although I am the applicant, this project is currently producing zero stormwater. There are no impervious surfaces on this property. What this application requests is to move a point discharge, 2 point discharges. One, the city of Cannon Beach's 12-inch storm pipe that crosses under Forest Lawn and the west to the east. And a private storm line from 1603 Forest Lawn Road that discharges in the same 2 to 3 foot area as the city storm does. And I'll ask if you had an opportunity to look at the photograph and videos that I submitted. Robert, are you able to pull that up?
Correct. We haven't been able to distribute the videos, but I can bring those up.
Just so that we all have the same understanding of what we're talking about.
Just a moment here.
Well, this is part of this is the private storm that is.
I haven't shared it yet. Kind of a clunky system.
So what you're seeing there is a sump system that is installed at 1603 Forest Lawn Road, which is the adjacent south property. And it is overwhelming the storm pipes because they're not connected into a city system. Right now, they're buried out in the right of way. So that causes this condition that just flows the water onto into the construction site. And that is an active construction site. That's not groundwater. That's runoff from the house next door. I think there's another video and maybe another, at least a photograph possibly. And that's the city pipe right there.
Hold on, let me,
That's the city pipe. And what you don't see in that video is the buried pipe from the house next door, which is actually contributing the most water to that situation. And that water flows directly into the garage, the approved garage on that site. And what you see sticking out of the water are the helical piers. So we're probably $60,000 in expenses into that construction site under the approved permit right now. And every time that we get a significant rain, it floods to about a foot deep. And that is the future site of a garage. So that's problematic. And like I said, that's not water that's being generated on the site. It's water that's coming from off-site, and it's not groundwater.
Jimmy, can I ask a couple questions, or if you prefer, I can hold on?
No, please.
Did you say there's a sump pump under that house to the?
There's a sump pump somewhere. I believe it's under the house or in the rear of the house. There's some lids back there, but I just looked at them from a distance. I think there's some sump lids. There's at least one sump pump. And if you stand there and watch it, it cycles on and it overwhelms the system. We think that when we're able to connect that storm pipe, the private storm pipe, into the 12-inch city pipe, it's going to alleviate that pressure, and it won't backflow out of the strip drain at the mouth of the garage and then flow onto the site. But right now, any water that comes off of that house, it either flows out through the strip drain and right directly into the garage site, or over to the right of way and then directly down into the site with the city water.
So to clarify, what this permit is for, though, is only moving the city outfall, or is it also for connecting?
Well,
the
it was
house?
a permit that was.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was
For connecting.
1603 to connect its water
Yes,
to the
I
city.
recall that.
Unfortunately, the city doesn't really have a system there. It was always just a pipe daylighted. That piece of green pipe is just an extension on the end of the existing cast iron pipe that's in place. And there was always just a hole in the ground. So it just flowed directly out there. And then that extension was put on sometime in the last, I don't know, since all this started.
So is this, again, just for my clarity, so is this permit to move the city outfall one and the same project with connecting that private home to the city?
Yes. So right now, both outfalls are about maybe 2 feet away from each other. And if this is allowed, we'll connect the 4-inch pipe to the 12-inch pipe and then carry that somewhere between 150 and 200 feet to the north and discharge it into the wetlands per the original approved application.
How do you determine how far you're going to take it? You say, it's 100 to 200 feet. That seems like a lot of play in the system, so to speak. So when do you actually make the determination at this point, we're bringing the outfall back onto the property?
Well, it roughly aligns with a former lot designation on that property. We always had said between lots 4 and 5. So we can be more specific than that, but it is somewhere between 150 and 200 feet of north from where they're currently being discharged. And that's just into undevelopable wetland. It takes it out past the north parking lot.
So did you ever, ask the wetland specialist whether it mattered? I don't know anything about wetland hydrology, but whether if it came in at 50 feet closer or 50 feet further, whether that would change the hydrology of the wetland significantly?
No, but we have to take the pipe, in the city right of way, to a point where it won't just flood developable upland, which it's doing right now.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm trying to think about the details of making sure the wetland is no more degraded than it needs to be. And the question would be, is there, as a biological fact, some point at which it makes more sense to have the outfall enter the wetland?
He's not expressed that to
Okay.
us. You know, just on a common sense basis,
Yeah.
it's going to be directly into the wetland instead
Yeah.
of where it's going now, which is
Yeah.
on the upland.
Yeah.
There's very little thought that went into what's happening right now.
So when it's moved, is the pipe itself, I'm seeing in your first, I don't know if it's exhibit A1. It's fairly early in our packet, page 9 in our packet, where it's just kind of a really rough drawing. It's just above that, Robert. Up.
Okay.
Oh, I guess it's not in A1 then. Okay, so it's before A1. It's
It's
a
at
very
the end of
rough.
the staff report.
End of the staff report, okay. The line goes up.
Hold on.
Is the intention that that line is gonna 90 and go into the actual wetland itself, and it'll have an open pipe?
It'll
Out of the
it'll
wetland?
daylight in the right of way like it does now, but just in an area where it won't be discharging on the developed.
Okay.
I probably shouldn't ask the question I did. I don't know. But you know,
Information we needed.
We need, you know, I think since the first time you came here and now, I think we've really figured out how to give the applicant the best chance to answer some of our
Explain, yeah.
concerns. And that's why this process has changed.
To wrap up with you, if you have any questions.
There you go.
Okay, go ahead. We'll let it.
Talked about the fact that it's going, so this is essentially a renewal of a permit that's already been approved. And because the rules changed, we had to come in and do this, which is fine, but none of the factual basis for that approval has changed. We're doing the exact same thing that was already approved.
You know, it begs the question, how come you didn't do it?
Well, it was always tied to the approval of the project so that we could do everything at once. I was not, the owners of this property and I were not the applicants of that original application. That was the city that was Mike McEwen on behalf of the city of Cannon Beach is what the application states. And the intent was always that when the project got approved and whatever iteration that was at that point, we didn't know. When the project got approved, we would put this in. That makes the most sense from a construction efficiency standpoint to do it all at one time. When we know the location of the building, we know the setbacks, and we can put the pipes where they make the most sense so we don't have to move them. Unfortunately, it took us longer to get approved than we maybe anticipated, and that permit expired. And instead of just being a renewal, which I initially attempted to do, staff informed me I couldn't do that, and I had to come in for conditional use. I just want to be clear, we talked about this. This does not remove any water from the wetland that would normally be going to the wetland. It just puts it in a different location, actually puts it more directly into the wetland. If this construction project is going to continue under the approved permit, whether this gets approved tonight or not, I'm gonna be pouring foundation sometime in the next 10 days to 2 weeks out there, and the garage will be part of that, regardless of whether there's water dumping onto it or not. We've already to this point been pumping it every day that we have construction out there. And rain, we pump the water out. So we're going to do that and pour the foundation under the permit. And then eventually it's going to definitely become a problem because that water will be draining into the garage area of the project. And we'll take whatever steps we have to take at that point. We have a letter from a wetland scientist, guy who's been studied that wetland since the 90s, and he states that we aren't harming the wetland. We have no countervailing scientific opinions or expert testimony. So with that, it seems to me like the stakeholders in this are the city, who has been dumping water onto this site for a decade or more. The owner of 1603 Forest Lawn Road, who has been dumping water onto this private property for 19 years. And the people that I represent are seems like we can have a win for all three of those stakeholders at no expense to the city of Cannon Beach, because under this proposal, the owners pay for all of it. So it seems like a win-win-win and a good outcome. I don't have anything else.
Go ahead.
You go first.
I looked at the site this afternoon for the first time in a long time. And I really didn't have a chance to answer what might be a question I could have answered in our packet, but literally looked at it and pretty much came here. So forgive me if this has already been answered. I noticed on the area that is ultimately going to be covered by that elevated garage and parking lot gravel down there, or I don't know if you even call that gravel. It's more of a construction grade rock.
Yeah,
Was that always planned to be in that area?
the rock,
The rock,
it's necessary because of the condition of the soil.
right?
The dirt is. No.
I realize you can't work in mud.
Yeah.
But one of the ideas of elevating that structure was to protect any.
It's not actually elevated. It's on grade beams. It sit on grade, but they are, the helical piers go down to the structural layers.
Okay, I might be mixing this up because I thought the idea was to protect water flow there underneath that structure.
No, not.
You're saying
no. No.
All right, that's helpful.
That project was approved before the changes to the wetland code. So I think you might be remembering that we made some revisions to the code that
Which-
might have required
Some
that.
conversation.
I think
One up
Yeah.
on Ash Street.
I missed the first part.
If they had an elevated house up on Ash Street that sits up off the ground, maybe it's that one too. That was
Yeah.
kind of odd.
You get all the exciting ones. So did you do a stormwater management plan?
We do, and in our storm, for the houses, it's required that they go into dry wells. And for the garage, it's going to connect to this system that we're extending.
So as a point source, stormwater discharge and diversion of stormwater for any reason within wetland or wetland buffer. I think that under the new code, there was supposed to be a stormwater management plan submitted with the application. Am I not reading that correctly? Did you submit one?
For what?
To talk about, for instance, the management plan is supposed to discuss a map or model of drainage patterns and stormwater flow, impacts to water quality, changes to water quantity and timing that may affect wetland function.
Is related to this conditional use permit or is related?
Yes, so as related to this change, because this is a point source discharge and it's a change in location of discharge, it's started at 100 feet away and now it's going to be 150 feet away. To me, that as I read that, it looks like diversion of stormwater for any reason within the wetland or wetland buffer. So one of the concerns, of course, with point source discharge is that it brings a lot of really polluted water. And so when you just dump a bunch of pollution into one location in a wetland, the wetland can't really handle it very well. So sometimes it has to be treated. Sometimes you have to do some kind of filtering or something before it actually gets dumped. So the question would be, does there need to be a filter in this process when you move? Do you need to put a filter in?
Not according to wetland census.
Okay,
He's reviewed
so-
these plans. He knows what we're doing.
And is that anywhere in our record that was submitted to the city and approved by the city?
No, I filled out a conditional use permit.
I've seen that, but that was it. Okay, I was just wondering if that was there or not. Okay,
Yeah, it's not. Come on, let me sign.
Yeah.
You do not require.
The question?
I have the same question of, I find the letter again, but I saw a letter, him indicating that it's not anything, but he didn't,
he didn't talk about water
he
quality.
didn't do a review of the water that's going to be discharged. That was,
No, he didn't.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, any other questions for Mr. Lerman? Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other presentations by the applicant? Okay, any presentations by proponents? Are there presentations by opponents? Oh,
Jan Siebert Ormond, P O Box 778, Cannon Beach, 97110. Dear Planning Commissioners, please deny CU 24-06. Please consider instead a bioswale as the solution to the drainage issues regarding this development on Forest Lawn Road. We need to be sure that the wetland is protected properly and that the water is nourishing the wetland. We have new wetlands protections in our city code now. Let's utilize them as well as we possibly can for the benefit of the ecosystems of our community and all who care about this special place. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further presentations by opponents? Okay, as the applicant, you have a final chance to say anything else you'd like to say or rebut anything you've heard?
No, thank you. Nothing to add unless you have questions.
Any further questions? Are we all clear? Do we all feel satisfied that we understand timing behind initial approval, start of construction?
Wouldn't say I'm clear.
I'd probably say 80% clear. I looked, the packet has December
Yeah.
2022 was the approval of this development permit. And it's good for 1 year. Is that 12 months is what the development permit is good for? So it expired December of 2023.
No,
No?
because the appeal period would have added on some time to the effective date.
So what was the expiration of the?
I can't give you the specific date, but it was obviously it had expired.
I would say probably about May 2024, because that would have been 1 year after the council decision.
And you
Yeah, that's
heard,
true.
Mr. Lermas said, well, when I asked the question about the timing, he said, you know, it took a while to get this approved. It took longer than we thought. I guess my question for you is, I just want to make sure we clearly understand how we got to a place where we're reviewing something that was already approved and now slightly modified and potentially subject to new provisions. So it may make some impact on our deliberations to have as clear an understanding as we can relative to why you're back in front of us again on this issue that's been approved.
I would say that it isn't slightly modified. It's the same plan that was approved before, and that the city was the original applicant for this. So, you know, with our agreement to pay for it. And it was intended to be done in conjunction with the approved residential development on the site so that the locations of the pipes could be, they could consider the placement of the buildings when we put the pipes in.
So could you, is it, geez, I don't have the word for what this might be. Would you say that, you know, you just did what you were approved to do, we started building, but we didn't have what we needed from the city? We did not have the sewer line in the position that we were understood it was going to
Well, we are producing, we have a stormwater plan for our development. We are not producing any runoff. So it is not runoff that we're producing. It's in the city right away, draining onto private property. It really isn't any of our property other than the fact that we're being impacted by it.
Right.
So we pressured the homeowner next door and the city, we could finally move after 18 years, move for discharge off of the private property and connect it to the city storm. But the city storm was not a complete system. So she couldn't even do that. So her permit is also stalled out and not complete. She's not adhering to the conditions of her permit because she's not connected into the city system. She's discharging into the right of way and it's running into our property in the 19th year.
If I could, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, I'm assuming you're waiting to do it until you got approval of the development. They didn't.
Is what we were waiting for approval of the development so that we know what we're working with. Otherwise, we're moving someone's city storm in the 1603's private storm for no reason.
Okay, I think that gives me enough clarity on it. Thank you.
Because the last,
Let's
one way you,
for the applicant.
actually, I was going to make a comment. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat. What seems to me that has changed is in fact our new wetland code. The original discharge point for the new proposed line was outside the buffer zone and therefore wasn't really subject to the point discharge concerns. Now it is in the buffer zone. And I had some concerns about point discharge as well as water treatment, just like it's already been discussed. But that's the only change that I can tell.
Correct. Okay. Before we close, anything you'd like to say in final comment, Mr. Lerman, in response to anything you've heard?
No.
Okay, great. Then we'll close and no one else on your team here on Zoom or, okay, great. Then we'll close the record and move to deliberation.
Okay.
Who would like to start?
I would say I have no problem with the concept. But I do think with the change in code, not only is the buffer size changed, but there is a new requirement to submit a stormwater management plan. And there are some pretty specific requirements at 17. Is the new number 102 or is that the old number?
Right, 102.
I think the new number, I believe that's the new number. 17102.
Yeah, 102 is the new number.
Okay, so at 17-102-060 G, it appears that because this is a point source discharge under G1F and maybe even a diversion of stormwater for any reason within the wetland, because the stormwater is currently in one spot, will go to another, that a stormwater management plan was required. And I think that's a pretty essential piece of making sure that the wetland is maintaining its function. But I don't know, did you, when you were in the process of reviewing the application, have a different read of the code in terms of what would be required? Because that's how I read the code.
This is the first time that we're.
Yeah, I know.
So this code is very long and frankly, very confusing to administer.
So I think, so that you are probably right the way you're reading it.
That's the way I interpreted it. I had concerns without a stormwater management plan that additional sediments without having I can't remember what the phrase is, like a catchment
Like
that allows.
a basin of some kind.
Yeah, it's like, I can't remember what it's specifically called, but structures like that to reduce sediment going into, like, if that's an issue, I don't know if that's an issue without a.
Certainly looking at the volume of water coming out of some of those pipes, I would imagine sediment could be a definite concern.
Or pollutants coming off of the roof or whatever, coming through that storm pipe, coming from wherever it's coming from.
And point source has a special issue for wetlands because it can scour out vegetation and I think you've mentioned amphibian egg masses here in the code. So I think that that's a piece that's there for a good reason.
Anyone else? My mind is fuzzy on this, so. Back 22, city says we want to move this downstream, basically down.
Right.
That hasn't happened.
No.
But they said they'd do it. It finally got approved.
Yes.
So we're talking about approving something that's already been approved, reapproving it basically, but under a new code.
Right.
I struggle with that a little bit.
That the new code applies.
That the new code applies.
The problem is that once the permit lapses, it is a new permit.
But whose fault is it elapsed?
Well, they had the choice to put it in when approved.
I think they also had they were told their application was complete. There's confusion at multiple points in this process, and I really struggle with that in terms of fairness. I don't struggle with our wetland code. I think it's strong. I think it's what we should have put in place. But there is a transition period that is.
What about a condition on approval that a stormwater management plan be provided?
Yeah, I thought about that being an option.
So that they Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we could do that. And then if anything, have it reviewed by, Public Works, who
Yes.
typically does that.
That's who I think it's supposed to go to anyway.
Right. So I mean, if there was something like that, it would put that condition in there and then Public Works could review that.
Okay. Anybody else? You want to make a motion?
Motion. I move that we approve the application with a condition that a stormwater management plan be planning department,
Public Works.
Public Works. Yes.
There were 4 conditions of approval
Go find those.
that were on there on
Yeah, I think,
page 6. So I don't know if you wanted to add a 5th.
yes, we'll add a 5th to those 4.
And some of those conditions spoke about, in order to discharge, we're gonna have to work with the property owner with an easement. Some erosion control measures that we're talking about, certain hours that can be worked on, and then we could add the condition of for stormwater.
Water management. Yeah.
Sorry, the management plan.
This is Les. Is there I'm a little concerned, I guess. I thought I understood what had happened up at, let me see here, the adjacent house and how they had redirected their runoff into the city system. But now what it sounds like is it was simply piped over into the same hole that the city outflow was going into. Do we need to put anything in our conditions about cleaning that whole thing up? I mean, I appreciate the comments that Mr. Lerma made, but what it sounds like to me is not at all what I thought got done 2 years ago.
Public Works, it'll become part of the city's stormwater program. So the city's gonna have to, once it gets done, is gonna have to maintain and take care of the line.
Correct. The original plan was to connect the stormwater line coming from Ms. Dorsey's house to the city stormwater line that currently exists, and then have the extension going to the north. This was supposed to happen in kind of 2 phases, the first of which got done, the second of which did not.
That's what we're
And
talking
so
about
that
now.
cleanup that you're proposing never got the opportunity to get done because the second stage never happened. So the junction never got put in the ground.
So the junction is part of this extent.
Tying everything together and moving it all north is part of the project.
So does that mean that we don't need to include a condition because it's sort of intrinsic to the project?
You can include a condition, but yeah, I would say it's gonna be part of the construction.
Folks think I can add it or not?
I think it's pretty clear that it's part of the project.
I'm all right with that.
Okay.
Les, was your concern answered?
No, I think that's fine. I just wanted to raise it for discussion.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt to have a condition.
That's true. Why not? Number 7.
Okay, so
I think I proposed a motion with the various conditions, including both what's proposed in the staff report plus submission of a stormwater management plan to Public Works.
do we want to do this tentative? I mean, we're waiting already. We could probably look at this too.
That's true. We could.
All right, you want to tentatively do it?
Sure. So this is a motion to tentatively approve.
Any particular reason why?
Well, we're getting into more language and conditions.
To see,
We just read them, didn't we?
Yeah, we do that all the time and get it wrong though. So I just,
so we'll just take a look at the conditions before we.
All right.
is there a second?
I'll second that.
Further discussion? All right, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Moritz. Commissioner Sinclair.
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander.
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek.
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. The conditional use is tentatively approved.
We're trying to bring that back to Monday too.
I think so. Yeah, it should be a slam. I mean, I won't say slam dunk. It should be quick.
Close as it gets to a slam dunk.
Should be straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah. The item is a legislative regarding CO 24, the Cannon Beach request for chapter 70, tree removal and protection. Text amendment request will be reviewed against the 17.86.070A amendments criteria and the statewide planning goals. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he has a conflict of interest or personal bias?
I do. Under advisement of the Oregon Government Ethics Director, that I make a statement of my possible interest regarding zoning order 2402. I do this to not only protect members and to protect the impartiality of the planning commission as a whole. Making a statement of possible conflict of interest as noted by city attorney at our, there is no reason for me not to be part of any discussion or the need to recuse myself from voting in text amendments. Any planning commissioners or city council members have any questions regarding my impartiality, the executive director of the Oregon Ethics Commission encourages you to contact her directly.
Okay, thank you. I have your staff report. Is there anything you guys want to add to what? Okay, no. We talked about correspondence. Okay, so this is not a quasi judicial hearing. So public testimony, opposition, whether you're in favor, opposed, or somewhere in between. So persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the chair, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. Would anyone like to make comments, public comment at this time about ZO 2402? Okay. Not much to respond to there. So let's move to our conversation around this item.
You guys want an explanation? I mean, this is simply just putting in what we agreed to last time.
This really is more of our tentative.
It is, yeah.
It's not really a continuation. It's more of our just saying,
Here,
okay, to think it. So let's just go through the items and make sure we agree that we've gotten it the way we want it.
How do you want to proceed?
I didn't have any concerns.
I only had one comment on the changes. Page 9 of the code. It was standards, 17.114.060 standards. The E through C. Minimum stump height for efficient removal and minimal soil disturbance. I didn't understand what I meant by efficient removal for the stump height. I was kind of just that part of the sentence I didn't really understand.
Yeah, I think the intent was to provide guidance is all. You know, unless it's within the structure itself, you cut out below grade, all other places, they're supposed to be retained. And I think somebody was asking.
Yeah, the 4 to 6 inches. Yeah. And I was confused what the for efficient removal was intended.
That's just the science. I mean, we just copied the science. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna mirror what Eric was saying. That language came straight out of the reference that I found that suggested that was about the right height for the reasons that it said, and I thought it was worth keeping the detail in. I didn't intend it to be confusing.
Okay, yeah, and I 4 to 6 inches. The rest of that whole sentence, everything is great. I just didn't understand that phrasing for efficient removal.
Let's
But if it,
are you okay if we just take out that part?
no, I'm okay if you leave it in. I didn't know what it meant.
Let's go on. Thank you.
I just wanted an explanation on the for efficient removal, but other than that, I thought it was a great implementation of everything we discussed.
Thank you, Eric.
So,
Thank Les.
Are there any other comments or concerns?
Oh, did we decide we're just to take that language out, for efficient removal?
You know, Les,
And just say the minimum height is 4 to 6 inches?
Can I ask the planning commissioner? I think it's probably extraneous language and I wouldn't mind taking that out. Can we just condition our approval on that? Just take
So-
out the efficient and,
so it would then read the minimum stump height for minimal soil disturbance.
46 inches.
Between
No,
4
actually, I would simply say the minimum stump height is between 4 to 6 inches.
yeah. You okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
And that's only for grades 20% or greater.
Yep.
As noted.
Other comments?
Yeah.
I think Barb's name has to very end.
All right.
Before it gets there.
Oh,
Oops.
You can look at my plan for two.
oh, there's an F there. That's the same
What-
mistake.
I'm not hearing what?
Oh, there's a Barb, no.
But just take the F off of Barb's name at the bottom where she signs that resolution. Instead of KNOPF, it's
Oh,
KNOP.
I see. You know, I was corrected on that just the other day. Apparently, that's a mental block I've got.
Barb
Okay.
told me that if she was intended to run a major publishing company, then she wouldn't be living in Canada.
Got it.
Okay, are we at the point of sort of a motion to?
Yeah, can I make the motion? I move that we approve this and recommend it to the city council for adoption with the changes in what paragraph was that? On page 9. Change in 17-114-060 E2C to remove the language for efficient removal and minimal soil disturbance. Remove that language and then modify the signature line on the resolution attached to remove the F from the mayor's name.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusik,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Orloff,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. The proposed ordinance is approved and moved to city council for their consideration. We'll move on to our.
Steve has a quick question.
Yeah, just procedurally, so what I'll end up doing is we'll set up some notices and similar public hearings that were held before Plan Commission will now be held before council. So with the positive recommendation to approve from Plan Commission.
Okay, great.
Just from a procedural standpoint. Eric, we'll have to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk to Bill. If it's legislative, maybe there's some things because it's not a quasi judicial, but we'll talk to him and find out about voting.
Yeah, I've got an email out to him right now, so.
Sounds good.
Move to the tree report. May we have the tree report, please?
All right, we had a somewhat busy month. Couple of hazard trees and then a number of trees being removed from a lot in conjunction with construction on First Street. The property on First Street is retaining a significant number of trees. They are going to be exceeding the minimum, therefore there was no replanting requirement in conjunction with that project.
Is that 135? Is that the one? The eastern.
Oh, yeah.
That's 2 lots.
Corner from where you're at.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move to good of the order. Anyone have anything for the good of the order? No. I'll put out one thing, Eric. This is the last night with us. We are going to miss you deeply.
I'm gonna miss being on the plane.
Your attention to detail has always been appreciated from someone who is not always, that's not my superpower.
I don't feel like it's my superpower either.
So you're pretty good at it.
Here's.
You're just really bad.
I own that.
That's right.
No, I appreciate the time I've had on planning commission. I feel like it's been very formative. I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
Pulling us through and making sure we stay on track for everything. And I look forward to bringing all the stuff that I've learned here to that next level at the city council.
Tell them what a good job we do and quit overturning our. How hard we fight for what we come up with.
Baseball review is limited to points of law, Eric.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
Good.
Well,
Christmas.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Everyone.
We get to say Merry Christmas again on Monday.
Oh, yeah.
And that's an afternoon meeting, so you were still accurate. No evening meeting here for me.
No.
Not quite done.
Okay, well, all right, we're done.
That was a good